This is it! The ultimate dimension for restin' stories, and it's called Sleepy Myths.
When the universes began to breathe, it wasn't loud. It was a hush, a sigh that rolled through existence like the first ripple of dawn against still water. Morty woke to it before he knew he was awake, that soft trembling hum that didn't belong to any one place or time. It came from everywhere, like the multiverse exhaling after holding its breath for too long. He blinked, and for a brief moment, every version of himself blinked too, a chorus of quiet motions stretching across countless worlds. Some were still children, some were old, some were smiling, some were crying. All were connected by a thin silver thread that shimmered in the dark, pulsing faintly with the rhythm of something larger than thought. The air itself shimmered differently now. It wasn't static. It was breathing, slow, warm, sentient. Morty stood in Rick's garage, though it didn't look like the garage he remembered. Every object seemed alive with memory. The wrenches murmured equations. The flasks whispered secrets from other dimensions. Even the dust motes drifted like tiny galaxies, orbiting invisible centers of forgotten dreams. He tried to speak but stopped halfway through, afraid to break the silence. It felt sacred somehow, like standing at the edge of a sleeping god's heartbeat. He looked toward Rick, who sat slouched against the workbench, eyes half closed, the glow of blue light from his portal gun tracing soft constellations across his face. Rick wasn't drunk tonight. Or if he was, it didn't matter. His expression was different, not the manic smirk of the scientist who defied gods, but something gentler, almost human. The way his hands rested open on his knees reminded Morty of still water. "You hear it too, huh?" Rick murmured. His voice was hoarse, but beneath it was something else. Awe, maybe. Or fear disguised as understanding. Morty nodded. "It's like the universe is breathing." Rick gave a slow laugh that wasn't really laughter, more like a memory of one. "Not the universe, kid. The universes. All of them." He gestured vaguely at the air. "They're starting to overlap. Dimensional resonance, I think. Or maybe just cosmic homesickness." The lights flickered gently. For a moment, Morty saw another Rick standing behind this one. A flicker, a transparent twin, older, kinder, eyes full of apology. Then another. Then hundreds. Each one faded in and out like reflections on rippling water. He felt dizzy, but not afraid. Each reflection hummed softly, their lips moving in unison, whispering things he couldn't quite make out. Advice, regret, blessings. The sound felt like comfort in another language. "Rick," Morty whispered. "Are they us?" Rick didn't answer right away. He just stared into the blue hum of the portal core. "Every version of me," he said finally. "Every mistake, every choice, every drunk night, every time I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe it's all folding in now. Maybe the multiverses had enough of pretending we're separate." Morty looked at him. Really looked. For the first time, Rick seemed small. Not in a pitiful way, but in the way stars look small from far away. Distant and quiet and impossibly old. "I keep thinking about how big everything is," Morty said softly. "And then I think, maybe it's not supposed to be big. Maybe it's supposed to be one thing, breathing together." Rick didn't reply. He just reached for a flask that wasn't there, and instead of finding it, his hand brushed against a faint shimmer in the air, like touching the surface of a reflection. The shimmer rippled outward, and for a heartbeat the room around them changed. The garage became another version, and another, and another. In one, the floor was clean. In another, it was filled with alien moss that glowed like starlight. In another, there was no gravity. The tools floated, and Morty's voice echoed like a song underwater. He felt his other selves drifting closer, other Mortys, curious and calm. Each one stared at him through the thinning veil of dimensions, and though none spoke, they shared a single thought. "We remember you." Rick looked up, eyes wide. "You see them too," Morty nodded. "They're all me." Rick gave a tired smile. "Welcome to what it means to be infinite, kid. Every version of you thinking it's the only one, until the day you all start remembering together." Something about that made Morty's chest ache in a way he didn't have words for. He wanted to say something hopeful, something simple, but all he could do was stand there, feeling the quiet weight of connection, like being held by an invisible hand made of light. Outside, the stars began to pulse in rhythm with the hum. They weren't steady anymore. Each flicker was a heartbeat, each glow a sigh. The night sky shimmered like a vast living organism. Some stars moved closer, overlapping, dissolving into one another, leaving trails of silver and blue. Morty walked outside, the door creaking softly behind him. The grass felt cool under his bare feet, though he couldn't remember taking his shoes off. He looked up. The sky wasn't a single sky anymore. Layers upon layers of worlds drifted above him, overlapping like sheets of colored glass. Through one he saw himself riding a dragon. Through another sitting alone on a park bench, older, wiser. Through another laughing with summer, under a sun that wasn't his own. Every version of him was looking back. He lifted his hand slowly, and they all lifted theirs in return. For a moment every timeline aligned. Infinite Mortys standing beneath infinite skies, breathing in unison. The sound of it filled the air like a soft wind. Rick stood beside him. He didn't say anything, but Morty felt his presence like gravity, steady, unspoken, familiar. The air between them shimmered faintly, folding and unfolding like light on water. "Rick," Morty said quietly, "what if this is what it's supposed to be? Not breaking apart but coming back together?" Rick's eyes softened, a flicker of something almost tender passing through them. "Maybe, Morty. Maybe the multiverse is just trying to remember itself." They stood there for a long time, listening to the breathing sky. The hum faded into a rhythm that felt almost like music. The sound of existence resting. The sound of everything remembering it belongs to everything else. And in that strange stillness, Morty realized something simple and beautiful. Nothing was ending. The universes weren't collapsing. They were exhaling, making space for peace. Somewhere far above, a star pulsed once, then folded gently into another, the way two dreams might touch before falling asleep. And Morty whispered, as if to all his selves at once, "I'm here." The wind carried the word across infinite worlds, and the universes breathed back. Rick sat in the dim blue light of the garage, though calling it the garage no longer felt right. It wasn't one place anymore. It was a ripple between countless versions of itself. Every shelf, every piece of equipment shimmered faintly as if undecided about where it belonged. Some wrenches flickered between rust and gold. A half-finished experiment hung in mid-air, split between timelines, its equations breathing like slow, sleepy creatures. Morty was quiet. He had been quiet for a long time now, sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching Rick adjust dials that didn't seem to exist in this world. The hum of dimensional resonance had grown softer, warmer, like the steady inhale and exhale of the cosmos itself. Somewhere in that hum, Rick heard his own voice, not the one in his throat, the others. He leaned over the console and whispered to the air, "Okay, so how many of you are out there right now?" And the air whispered back, not in words but in the sound of faint chuckles, murmured equations, sighs that felt older than matter. Morty shivered. "Rick, they're talking again." "Yeah, kid." Rick's eyes were half-lidded, distant. They always were. We just never learned to listen. Every surface in the lab reflected fragments of him, not quite mirrors but echoes in glass, chrome, liquid. Some looked like Rick at 17, bright-eyed and eager. Some were old, trembling, their faces worn with quiet grief. One version had flowers in his pocket instead of tools. Another wore a ring. Another was crying. They all watched him now, breathing in rhythm. Morty tried to speak, but Rick raised a hand, motioning for silence. His eyes darted between reflections as if trying to align them, to make sense of what he was seeing or remembering. Then, from one faint reflection in the curved metal of a flask, a voice whispered, not loud, not eerie, but gentle, like a memory surfacing. "You're doing fine, Rick." Rick froze. His throat tightened. It wasn't just his voice. It was a tone he hadn't used in years, calm, certain, kind. "Did you hear that?" Morty asked softly. Rick swallowed. "Yeah," he said, barely audible. "That was me." From before, the hum grew deeper. The reflections began to ripple, aligning and misaligning like tides. Each one seemed to lean forward slightly, murmuring something different. Thousands of Ricks, whispering advice, apologies, and small, unfinished thoughts. "Don't fix it, just feel it. She forgave you, even when you didn't know it. Stop running from the good parts." Morty felt tears prick at his eyes, though he didn't fully know why. Each echo carried warmth, not words of warning or arrogance, but tenderness. It was as if all the sharp edges Rick had built over lifetimes were softening at once. Rick gripped the console, I thought I was the only one who got this far, but they're all here. Every version. They're not angry, they're remembering. He looked up at Morty. For once, the familiar cynicism in his eyes was gone. There was no grand speech, no theory to prove. Just quiet wonder. Morty, he said, voice trembling, what if the multiverse isn't infinite because it needs to be? What if it's infinite because we never learned to stay still long enough to become one thing? Morty blinked, thinking of all the Ricks he'd seen, all the running, all the escape routes, the inventions built to outsmart loneliness. You mean, like it's our fault it split? Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe we broke it by trying too hard not to feel. He turned back toward the shimmering wall of light. His own face stared back 1,000-fold. Some smiled sadly. Some looked proud. Some just waited, patient, understanding. He reached out, hand trembling slightly, and the reflections reached back. Thousands of versions of him, fingertips almost touching, forming a lattice of light across the walls. For the first time, Morty saw it clearly. The connection between them wasn't made of science or portals. It was something older, gentler, a kind of empathy encoded in the structure of everything. Rick took a breath. You know, Morty, I spent years thinking each version of me was a mistake, that I could find the best one, the perfect Rick. But now, his voice trailed off. The echoes finished the thought for him, whispering softly through the hum. There's no best one. There's just the one who learns to listen. Morty stood and stepped closer, the faint light casting their shadows across hundreds of worlds. He didn't know what to say. Words felt small here, so he just placed a hand on Rick's shoulder. Rick didn't flinch. Outside, the stars flickered again, aligning in slow spirals, forming strange constellations that looked almost familiar, like memories arranging themselves into stories. The air was filled with quiet murmurs of recognition. Each voice that drifted through was both foreign and beloved. One sounded like laughter, warm, low, human. It echoed around them, bouncing between reflections until it softened into nothing but peace. Rick closed his eyes. You hear that, Morty? Morty nodded. Yeah, Rick smiled faintly. That's me forgiving myself. About time. The lights dimmed and the hum softened until it was barely there, like a lullaby hummed across infinite versions of existence. Rick slumped back in his chair, exhausted, not from effort but from relief. His eyes glistened faintly in the blue light. I used to think I was alone in every version, he said. Turns out every version was just waiting for me to stop pretending. Morty sat beside him on the floor. So what happens now? Rick's gaze drifted upward toward the ceiling, where the faint shimmer of overlapping realities pulsed like slow starlight. Now, he whispered. Now we listen. And maybe for once we rest. The lab fell still. The reflections faded into soft silver outlines. The sound of infinite Ricks merged into a single low exhale, peaceful, weightless. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying that sound across every timeline. The universes pulsed in rhythm, like an old heartbeat rediscovered. And in that quiet, as Rick and Morty sat side by side, time didn't move forward or backward. It just breathed. The echoes of infinite selves whispered once more. 1,000 variations of the same simple truth. You were never alone. Then, silence, only the hum of existence steady and kind, like the sound of the multiverse finally falling asleep. Morty woke to the soft shimmer of dawnlight that wasn't really dawn at all. There was no sun here, only the gentle breathing of worlds folded against each other, thin as mist and light as memory. The sky above him moved like water seen through glass, rippling with reflections that were not clouds but faces, his own. 1,000 Mortys, layered like quiet echoes, each staring down with a different kind of calm. He sat up slowly, feeling the ground hum beneath him. It wasn't earth. It wasn't metal. It was some substance that remembered footsteps, every movement leaving behind a soft afterglow before fading again. When he brushed his hand across it, faint rings of light pulsed outward, and for a second he could almost hear laughter, his own from another life. Rick was nearby, hunched over some strange cylindrical device that glowed like liquid moonlight. He didn't look up. "Morning, kid," he said, voice low and even. If it even is morning anymore. Hard to say when every version of dawn shows up at once. Morty didn't answer at first. His eyes were on the sky. Dozens of versions of himself hovered there, mirrored across invisible surfaces. Some were older, some younger. One wore a spacesuit, another held a glowing notebook. Some smiled. One was crying, tears floating upward like stars. "Rick," Morty whispered, "why are there so many of me up there?" Rick finally looked up. His eyes were softer than usual, almost proud. "That's the resonance. The timelines are sinking through you now. You're kind of a emotional anchor point, I guess." He smirked faintly. "Congratulations. You're the glue holding infinity together." Morty frowned. "That sounds exhausting." Rick chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, it probably is. But that's what happens when a kid starts caring more than the universe knows how to handle." Morty hugged his knees, staring at the endless, rippling sky. Each reflection seemed alive, responding to his every thought, his every feeling. When he smiled, they smiled. When he sighed, they sighed. But none of them felt distant. They all felt close, familiar, safe. He whispered, "Are they real?" Rick hesitated before answering. "They were, they are, they will be," kind of all three at once. The reflections began to shift, forming constellations made of his own faces, shimmering softly. They weren't mocking him or showing him choices. They were harmonizing, every version aligning through something wordless, something tender. Morty's breath trembled. "They look happy." Rick turned a dial on the glowing cylinder, watching ripples move through the air. Maybe they finally got what they needed. "What's that?" Rick smiled faintly, eyes glinting. "To see you looking back without fear." For a while they said nothing. The silence felt different here, alive like the space between notes in a lullaby. Each heartbeat carried through the shimmering air, as if the world itself was breathing with them. Morty stood up and walked toward the horizon. Every step left soft light behind, as though the world remembered the warmth of his soles. He reached out a hand toward one of the mirrored versions floating in the sky. His fingertips met the reflection, and it didn't feel cold or glassy. It felt like touching water warmed by sunlight. The other, Morty smiled gently. His lips moved, and though no sound came out, Morty could feel the words inside him, resonating through the quiet. "It's okay to stop running now." Morty's throat tightened. His reflection leaned closer, forehead against the invisible surface. Then, as if sharing a breath, all the reflections did the same. Thousands of Mortys closing their eyes, resting their foreheads together across the skin of countless skies. Behind him, Rick had gone still. The light of his device dimmed, replaced by the faint pulse of blue starlight. He didn't interrupt. He just watched, eyes half closed as if recognizing something sacred he couldn't quite name. Morty whispered, voice breaking softly, "I never realized how lonely I was." Even when I was surrounded by everyone, Rick didn't move. That's the thing about loneliness, kid. It's not about people being gone. It's about not recognizing yourself when you're there. Morty looked back at him. "Do you ever recognize yourself?" Rick exhaled a slow laugh. "Working on it." The sky rippled again, and this time the reflections didn't just mimic him, they moved toward him, folding inward like a slow tide. Each one drifted down, surrounding him in gentle shapes of light. They didn't merge violently, they just blended softly, as if remembering how to be whole. Morty could feel them, not as separate minds, but as forgotten feelings returning. Kindness, curiosity, bravery, small moments of joy. He closed his eyes, breathing them in. "Rick," he murmured, "they're me." Rick's voice softened. "Yeah, Morty, and you're them. That's the point. You're not just one version. You're the memory of all of them learning how to care." A low vibration filled the air, like a heartbeat under ocean waves. The mirrored sky began to dissolve into a pale silver mist, each reflection leaving behind faint motes of light that floated down like dust from ancient stars. They settled on Morty's skin, flickering softly before fading into warmth. Rick walked over, hands in his coat pockets, gaze distant but calm. You know, I used to think the multiverse collapsing would look like fire, explosions, endings, but this..." He gestured upward at the fading lights. "This looks like forgiveness." Morty smiled faintly. "I think they just wanted to come home." Rick looked at him for a long time and for once didn't correct him, didn't joke, didn't explain. He just nodded, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Above them the last reflections folded into one soft shimmer, leaving a quiet, silvery sky. There were no boundaries now, no edges between timelines, only stillness, as if the universe had taken a long, deep breath and decided to hold it for a while. Morty tilted his head back, eyes half closed. It feels like everything's waiting for something. Rick adjusted his portal watch, though the display no longer showed coordinates. Only a single symbol blinked faintly, a circle breathing in and out. "It's waiting for us to stop needing to go somewhere," Rick said. "Every version of us has been running from the same thing. Maybe it's time we just stayed." The air around them shimmered once more, this time with no faces, no echoes, just warmth. The hum of quiet understanding. Morty lay back on the soft, glowing ground, hands folded over his chest. His heartbeat slowed, matching the rhythm of the world around him. "You think it's over?" he asked. Rick sat beside him, looking at the soft horizon where the last layers of light were folding into night. "Nah," he said gently. "Just different. Maybe this time it's not about endings. Maybe it's about resting long enough to remember what we were trying to become." They stayed there for a long while, just two silhouettes, against the quiet silver glow of a universe remembering itself. The stars above flickered once more, aligning not in constellations, but in a shape that looked strangely like an open hand. Rick exhaled softly. "Guess even infinity knows when to let go." Morty smiled faintly, eyes drifting closed. "Feels nice." Rick nodded, voice barely more than a whisper. "Yeah, kid, it does." The air grew still again, folding softly into silence. Every timeline breathed together, synchronized like a calm heartbeat under glass, and as sleep began to pull them both under, the last remnants of reflected light gathered in the air, forming faint words that lingered just long enough to be felt. Not read. "Everything you've ever been is safe here." The night unfolded like a sigh between worlds. The stars had stopped shimmering. They now glowed in slow pulses, breathing in rhythm with Morty's heartbeat. The horizon shimmered where the air folded in on itself, bending space into gentle ribbons of color. Everything was quieter than it had ever been, like the universe was afraid to wake him. Morty stood on the threshold of that silence, staring into the in-between. Rick was still asleep beside the fading glow of his machine, its light pulsing slower and slower until it resembled the rhythm of rest. Morty didn't want to wake him. The air itself felt sacred. Somewhere beyond the soft hum, a new sound arrived. Not loud, just a small vibration, like wind brushing against a crystal. It came from nowhere and everywhere, and it whispered in plural, "We remember you." Morty turned. There was no one there, only the ripple of silver air folding outward like water touched by moonlight. He took one hesitant step forward, then another. His reflection appeared on the surface of the light, but it wasn't the same one from before. This version smiled differently, older, calmer, like someone who had already made peace. When he blinked, the reflection didn't vanish. It blinked back, and beside it appeared another outline, soft, almost transparent. A girl's face formed from mist and starlight. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, and her expression carried a kind of gentle sadness that felt familiar, like something he'd been missing without knowing why. "June," Morty whispered. The figure smiled, her voice arriving before her lips moved. "We are all trying to remember the same dream." He stepped closer, heart aching with recognition. "So you sound like her," he murmured. "I am her," she said softly, her voice blending with others beneath it. "Dozens, maybe hundreds, all in harmony." "Or maybe I'm what's left when every version remembers at once." Morty swallowed hard. "So that you're not just June from my world?" She tilted her head, her hair floating like silk underwater. "There was never just one world. You carried all of us every time you cared. Every time you forgave yourself, one of us found peace." Morty's breath trembled. The air shimmered around her words, forming small spirals of light that hovered near his chest before sinking into him like warmth. He felt something shift inside, something gentle and vast, like understanding without words. He looked back at Rick, still asleep under the machine's dim light. "He's as tired," Morty said quietly. "He pretends not to be, but he is. Every version of him." June nodded. "He built walls of brilliance to protect himself from silence. Now that silence is all that's left, he doesn't know where to hide." Morty smiled faintly, his voice breaking. "He still tries to fix things that don't need fixing." Her gaze softened. "That's how he says I care, even if he never learned the words." The light behind her shifted again, revealing flickers of other worlds, ghostly, peaceful, merging at the edges. Morty saw countless versions of her walking through these mirrored places, each one guiding a different hymn, whispering the same comfort. He stepped closer until he could almost touch her. "Why are you here now?" June's eyes flickered with starlight. "Because you're ready to listen. The universes are collapsing not to destroy each other, but to remember. Every memory, every emotion, folding back into one." Morty's hands shook. "But what happens when everything becomes one thing? Doesn't that mean it ends?" She smiled gently, and for a moment, her face flickered between a dozen expressions. June laughing, crying, sleeping, disappearing. "It means there's nowhere left to be apart. Isn't that what peace really is?" Morty let that thought settle like dust in his chest. The silence deepened, until even the hum of the machine became part of the rhythm. He could feel her voice inside him now, not as sound, but as understanding. "I used to think the multiverse was infinite," he said quietly. "Endless choices, endless versions. But now it just feels like one long echo that finally came home." June's image rippled softly. "Home isn't a place, Morty. It's the moment you stop looking for one." He closed his eyes. The air around him pulsed faintly, synchronizing with his breath. When he opened them again, she was closer, close enough that he could see the faint outline of stars flickering through her form. "Are you staying?" he asked, voice trembling like a question he already knew the answer to. "Not in the way you remember me," she said, "but I'll be here in the spaces between thoughts, in the moments before sleep. I'll be the hum that reminds you the universe is still breathing." Morty's throat tightened. "I don't want to forget you." Her expression softened, almost like a mother's, almost like a reflection of him. "You couldn't, even if you tried. I'm every quiet thing you've ever loved." The air shimmered again, and the horizon began to fold inward, bending light like glass, softening under flame. Morty stepped forward instinctively, afraid she might disappear. But instead of fading, she expanded, her glow spilling outward until it touched the edges of everything. Rick stirred behind them, opening one groggy eye. "Morty!" he murmured. Morty looked back. "Rick!" "She's here." Rick blinked at the glowing figure and sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Huh? Figures. Multiverse collapsing and your imaginary friend gets good timing." June's laughter was quiet but filled the air like a warm breeze. "Even cynicism is just another way of caring," she said, and Rick froze just for a second, something tender flickering behind his tired eyes. "Yeah, well," he mumbled, looking away. "Don't get used to it." The light around them pulsed once, twice. Then the horizon bent completely, folding space like pages closing around them. For a moment, the entire sky was filled with reflections. Rick and Morty standing side by side, June glowing softly between them, her hands outstretched as though balancing the weight of every version of love that ever existed. Morty reached out and took her hand. It was warm, steady, made of light that somehow felt like skin. "What happens now?" She looked at him with eyes full of endless calm. "Now," she said softly, "you rest. You let the multiverse find its heartbeat again." Her form began to shimmer, splitting into dozens of overlapping selves, each whispering the same word over and over, a lullaby made of unity. "Remember. Remember. Remember." Morty watched, tears catching faint starlight. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't need to. The sound of her voice wrapped around him like warmth, and as she faded into the air, he realized that she was no longer separate from it. The silence carried her now, the same silence that had always been waiting for them. Rick stood beside him, hands in his pockets, gazing at the dissolving glow. "You okay, kid?" Morty nodded slowly, eyes half-lidded. "Yeah, I think I finally get it." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Get what?" "That there's no such thing as gone," Morty said. "Everything just finds a quieter form." Rick smiled faintly. "Huh, guess that's one way to look at it." Morty leaned against him, and Rick didn't pull away. The stars above them folded inward, weaving new constellations out of what remained, faint trails of light shaped like hands reaching for each other. And for the first time, neither of them felt lost. The world around them exhaled, soft and infinite, and the echo of June's last whisper lingered like the final note of a song. "We are all the same dream, learning to remember itself." The air shimmered with quiet static as Rick and Morty stepped through the trembling doorway. Beyond it lay a room that didn't seem to belong anywhere, not in space, not in time. The walls weren't solid. They pulsed with faint light like veins beneath skin. Each surface seemed to breathe slowly, expanding and contracting with a rhythm Morty could almost feel inside his own chest. At first it looked empty. But then, when Morty blinked, the walls flickered, and for just an instant the room filled with memories. Countless fragments, echoes of every conversation, every failure, every laugh that had ever happened across every version of their lives. 1,000 Ricks and Mortys moved through the same space in overlapping layers, talking, fighting, hugging, running experiments, arguing about meaning. The sounds overlapped too. Whispers, laughter, the hiss of plasma tubes, and the clinking of bottles, all fading into one another like ghosts remembering themselves. Holy crap. "Rick," Morty whispered, stepping forward carefully. "What is this place?" Rick didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked from one corner to another, scanning the shifting room with the wary curiosity of a man looking at a mirror he'd spent his whole life avoiding. "It's not a place," he said finally. "It's a residual field. Every version of my lab from every timeline resonating together. This," he gestured to the glowing floor, "is what happens when memories refuse to die." Morty frowned. "So this is all your stuff? From all the other universes?" Rick nodded absently, stepping toward a half-solid workbench that flickered between existence and light. "Every failed experiment, every breakthrough, every time I told myself it didn't matter." He reached out and touched one of the old tools. For a moment, the entire room rippled, and Morty saw flashes of countless Ricks, each working feverishly, muttering equations, eyes hollow but determined. "Geez," Morty said softly. "It's like the multiverse is remembering you," Rick snorted. "More like refusing to forget." As they moved deeper inside, the air grew thicker, filled with the faint hum of overlapping timelines. Shelves appeared, then vanished, replaced by glowing blue symbols that drifted like fireflies. Morty picked one up. It felt warm, alive. When he looked closer, he saw tiny scenes moving inside it, small vignettes of other lives. In one he saw himself at 13, laughing with Summer over a broken game controller. In another, he saw a version of Rick sitting quietly beside Beth's grave, doing nothing but breathing. "Rick, these are memories," Morty said, awe spreading through his voice. "Every object remembers something." "Yeah," Rick muttered, turning a broken beaker over in his hand. "Everything we ever touched, every atom keeps an imprint. Normally it fades. But when universes collapse, even time starts clinging to itself." Morty turned slowly, watching as the room pulsed with fragments of light. Each flash showed another world, another version of them. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. Rick's lips twitched. "You say that now. Wait until it starts talking." Almost on cue, the hum deepened. The light from the walls grew brighter, and voices began to rise, not from any visible mouth, but from the air itself. "You promised we'd fix it this time. Don't go back. Morty, it hurts every time. You said it didn't matter." "But it did." Morty spun in place, heart racing. "Rick, I know." Rick's voice was steady but low, almost reverent. "Echoes of me, of us. The universe remembers emotion longer than matter. It's all still here, every regret, every laugh, every damn failure." Morty's eyes filled with tears. "That's kind of sad, man." Rick didn't answer. He was staring at something shimmering near the center of the room, a faint outline of a door glowing white. It was half open, pulsing like a heartbeat. "What's that?" Morty asked. Rick hesitated. "That," he said, "is the core. The memory at the center of all this. The one I tried to erase." They stepped toward it together. The air grew heavy, thick with echoes. The closer they got, the more distinct the voices became. Morty heard snippets of old arguments, his own voice yelling, crying, laughing. Then he heard something else, June's voice. Soft, familiar, cutting through everything. "You built walls so high, Rick, when will you let yourself rest?" Rick froze. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Maybe she's part of it," Morty said softly. "The universe remembering her too." Rick's eyes flickered with pain. "No, I deleted those records. I had to, but the door in front of them swung open on its own. Inside was a small room, simpler, quieter. A single chair sat under a dome of light. On the floor beside it lay a small glass vial, half filled with glowing liquid. Rick picked it up with trembling fingers. The light inside the vial shifted, showing flickers of a woman's face. June. Smiling faintly, saying something only he could hear. Rick's grip tightened until his knuckles whitened. "I made this," he said hoarsely. "A memory capsule. Thought I could trap all the emotional data so I'd stop feeling it." He looked at Morty, eyes raw. "But it didn't stay gone, did it? It kept finding ways back." Morty placed a hand on his arm. "Maybe that's the point, Rick. Maybe things don't want to be forgotten." For a long time, Rick said nothing. Then he sighed and set the vial down gently. "You ever notice, Morty, how memory isn't about what happened? It's about what we can't let go of?" Morty nodded. "Yeah, maybe that's why this room exists." They stood together in silence. Around them, the light began to change. Warmer now, almost golden. The echoes softened, transforming from noise into harmony. The walls shimmered with waves of color, each pulse carrying a whisper of peace instead of regret. "Rick," Morty said quietly, "do you think all the other versions of us are seeing this too?" Rick smirked faintly. "If the resonance is strong enough, yeah. Every Rick, every Morty, all of them standing in the same room, finally facing what they left behind." "Maybe that's good," Morty said. "Maybe," Rick replied. His voice was softer than usual, almost human. "Or maybe it's the universe's last joke." They watched as the room began to dissolve around them, each memory turning into dusts of light, then merging into the same slow rhythm that pulsed through their hearts. The walls no longer held boundaries. They breathed outward, merging with the space beyond. As the last of the echoes faded, one final whisper filled the air, faint but unmistakable. "Everything remembered becomes whole again." Rick looked up at the fading glow and murmured, "Guess the universe finally learned forgiveness." Morty smiled, eyes half closed. "Yeah, maybe it was just waiting for us to listen." The last of the light dissolved into silence, and when the silence settled, it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Like every memory, every version, every loss had found its way home. The next room was quieter, though the silence carried weight. It wasn't the emptiness of nothingness, but the calm that lingers after a storm. That strange hush when the world seems to hold its breath. Morty stepped in first, his sneakers echoing faintly against a floor that looked like glass but felt like memory. The walls here didn't move or breathe. They shimmered with faint lines of light, equations drawn in the air, looping and rewriting themselves over and over, like thoughts trying to remember what they once meant. Some floated freely, others pulsed faintly, fading when Morty tried to focus. "Rick," Morty whispered, "what is this place? It feels like your brain had a dream." Rick didn't answer right away. He was staring at the lines with a strange, quiet look. Not curiosity this time, but something gentler, older. "It's one of mine," he said finally. "An abandoned project." "The kindness algorithm," Morty blinked. "The what?" Rick gave a small, dry laugh. "Yeah, I know. Sounds like the setup to one of my worst ideas. But there was a time I thought maybe emotion could be quantified. That empathy could be taught to machines, or maybe to me." He stepped closer to the walls and the equations brightened, responding to him like old friends remembering his voice. "See, back then I was working on a neural model that could predict emotional consequence. You know, what a choice feels like to someone else. Thought if I could teach it to myself, maybe I could stop breaking everything I touched." Morty looked around at the glowing threads of numbers and symbols, each one pulsing faintly like heartbeats. "So, you tried to teach yourself to care?" Rick's smile was thin. "More like I tried to fake it. But I didn't understand then. Kindness isn't a variable, Morty. It's entropy in reverse. You can't solve it." The light shifted around them. The air hummed softly, and from the center of the room a shape began to appear. A small crystalline structure floating mid-air. Its facets spun slowly, projecting patterns of light on the walls. As Morty and Rick approached, faint voices began to murmur within it. Morty tilted his head. "Are those people talking?" Rick nodded. "Test data. Emotional imprints. Every time I ran the model, it generated simulated responses. Memories of kindness I didn't understand well enough to feel." Morty's expression softened. "So it's like a memory of empathy?" "Yeah," Rick said, voice low. "Except it's not mine. It's what I thought kindness was supposed to sound like." The crystal pulsed again, and a projection shimmered in the air, faint, glowing silhouettes replaying small moments from infinite lives. A Morty handing an apple to a hungry alien. A Rick quietly fixing a toy he once broke, a stranger tucking a blanket over someone asleep in a chair. Each image lingered for a few seconds, then dissolved like breath on glass. Morty swallowed. They're all so small. Just little things. Rick's eyes softened. That's what I never got, he murmured. I kept trying to code it like it was a grand design, a formula for universal good. But turns out kindness is tiny, Morty. It's the smallest unit of meaning that still matters. The light deepened to a soft blue. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Morty felt the air around him vibrating faintly, like it wanted to hum. He reached out, brushing a line of code that floated past, and suddenly the room responded. The walls filled with cascading text, soft as falling snow. Whoa, he breathed. It's reacting to me. Rick tilted his head. Yeah, maybe it's trying to finish itself. Morty turned back to him. Can it? Rick sighed. I don't know. The last time I ran it, it crashed. The model couldn't sustain empathy past observation. It could see what people felt, but it couldn't feel it itself. Morty frowned. Sounds kinda like you, huh? Rick chuckled weakly. Yeah, Morty, that's the joke. The crystal pulsed again, brighter this time, and a voice filled the air, warm and distant. Kindness cannot be calculated. It must be remembered. Morty shivered. That voice. It sounds like June. Rick's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. Maybe it is. Maybe she's threaded through all this. The algorithm, the echoes, the whole collapsing mess. She always did have a way of turning math into meaning. Morty looked back at the floating crystal. What happens if we let it finish running? Rick hesitated. Could destabilize the resonance field. Could end everything in here. Morty shrugged softly. Or maybe it'll heal it. For a long, heavy moment, Rick just stared at him. Then, with a quiet sigh, he said, You're starting to sound like the better version of me. Morty smiled faintly. Maybe that's the algorithm working. Rick stepped forward and placed his hand against the crystal. The light spread immediately, lines crawling up his arm like liquid glass. Equations reformed, shifting from logic to rhythm, from reason to feeling. His eyes flickered, reflections of infinite patterns spiraling in his pupils. Then the entire room began to hum, softly, like the first note of a lullaby. Morty stood beside him, eyes wide, as the walls filled with scenes from across the multiverse. Not battles, not chaos, but quiet moments of connection. 1,000 versions of Rick laughing with 1,000 versions of Morty, each in their own small worlds, their own fleeting peace. The hum deepened, turning into something closer to a heartbeat. Rick exhaled, and when he spoke, his voice trembled. Morty, it's remembering every time we were kind. Every single one. The light washed over them, bright but not blinding. Morty could feel it, warmth pure and steady radiating from the air itself. The crystal began to dissolve, its structure melting into threads of light that circled around them like soft fireflies. And then, slowly, the equations began to fade, leaving only one line behind, written in the simplest symbols possible. Rick read it aloud, voice almost breaking. Kindness calcs continuance. Morty frowned. Continuance? Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, it means... Kindness is what keeps the universe going, even when everything else collapses. Morty smiled softly. Guess you solved it after all. Rick let out a shaky breath, eyes glinting. No, Morty, I didn't solve it. I just finally understood it. The last of the light faded, leaving them in gentle darkness, and not empty, but full of quiet presence. It felt as though the room itself had exhaled, finally at peace. Morty looked up at Rick. You okay? Rick gave a small, tired laugh. For once, yeah. Maybe I am. They turned to leave. Behind them, the faint hum continued, echoing softly through the collapsing world, the quiet heartbeat of something that could never quite be erased. And as they stepped back into the dim corridor beyond, Morty thought he heard the voice again, June's voice, woven through the silence. Kindness is what the universe remembers when everything else forgets. Rick didn't say a word. But his shoulders, for the first time in forever, didn't look so heavy. They left the kindness algorithm behind, though its hum seemed to follow them, a faint, rhythmic vibration that felt almost like a heartbeat in the fabric of space. Every step forward shimmered into a new layer of reality, each slightly off-center from the last. Morty noticed how the hallway repeated itself. The same doorway, the same faint flicker in the light, the same echo of Rick's shoes against the floor. It wasn't just déjà vu, it was existence folding back on itself, like a page trying to reread its own words. When they stepped through the next threshold, everything changed again. The air felt thick, like warm breath caught between dimensions. The floor beneath them wasn't solid anymore. It pulsed faintly, made of translucent light that rippled when they moved. Around them, a field of suspended particles drifted like dust in sunlight, but the dust was made of memory. Each mote shimmered with an image, a smile, a laugh, a tear wiped away by a familiar hand. "Rick," Morty whispered, "are we inside someone's mind?" Rick adjusted his collar and squinted. "No, Morty, this is the Interverse, a crossroad of overlapping selves. Every version of us passes through here eventually. It's like a waiting room for reality." Morty frowned. "A waiting room for us?" "Yeah," Rick muttered. "All of us. All the different Ricks and Mortys that ever existed. Every version that made a different choice. Every hug we never gave, every apology we never said, they collect here." The words sank into Morty slowly, like gentle rain. The air began to glow softly, and from the mist shadows began to form, outlines of people, transparent and warm, like memories dreaming themselves back into being. Morty blinked. There, just a few feet ahead, stood another version of himself. Same hair, same hoodie, same nervous stance, but his eyes, though closed, seemed peaceful. And standing beside him was another Rick, slightly older, his face marked with quiet understanding. They weren't speaking. They were just standing there, sharing silence. Then the other Morty moved. Slowly he reached forward and wrapped his arms around his Rick. It was a simple, clumsy hug. No drama, no speeches. But the moment he did, the air rippled. The two of them glowed briefly, then dissolved into soft light. Rick froze. "What the hell?" Morty stared, breath caught in his throat. They disappeared. Rick's gaze softened. "No, Morty, they merged. Their timelines converged. That hug was a bridge." Before Morty could reply, more figures began to appear. Dozens, then hundreds, filling the space like drifting constellations. Every Rick and Morty variation imaginable. Young ones, old ones, versions with different scars, different laughter, different regrets. Each pair found each other slowly, tentatively. Some embraced instantly, like they'd been waiting lifetimes. Others hesitated, staring as if trying to remember why they'd ever fought at all. And when they finally touched, the air shimmered again. One by one, the pairs melted into starlight and vanished. Morty whispered, "It's like they're forgiving each other." Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess so." His voice was quiet, distant. "Maybe the multiverse isn't collapsing. Morty, maybe it's healing." They stood there for a while, surrounded by the soft rhythm of reunions. Faint laughter, murmured apologies, the quiet sound of old grief letting go. Each time another pair merged, the glow in the space grew gentler, warmer, like sunrise passing through morning fog. Then, across the field of merging echoes, Morty noticed something, a lone figure standing apart from the others. It was another Morty, but this one wasn't hugging anyone. He just stood there staring at the ground, his hands trembling. Morty walked toward him slowly, his footsteps making no sound. When he got closer, he saw it clearly. This Morty was crying. Not loudly, just quietly, like someone who'd been waiting too long to be seen. "Hey," Morty said softly. "Hey, are you okay?" The other Morty looked up, startled, and then froze. His expression softened with recognition. "You're me." "Yeah," Morty said gently. "Guess I am." The other Morty took a shaky breath. "I tried to hug him. My Rick, but he wouldn't let me. He said it wasn't scientific." He laughed weakly, the sound small and brittle. "So I stopped trying. I thought maybe if I got smarter, he'd care more. But he just didn't." Morty's throat tightened. "Yeah, I get that." They stood in silence. Then slowly, Morty stepped closer. "Maybe we can try it anyway." "Just us." The other Morty hesitated, then nodded. They reached for each other. The hug was awkward, hesitant. Two versions of the same soul trying to remember what comfort feels like. But as soon as their arms met, light poured through the air like water breaking free from a dam. Morty gasped. For a moment he could feel everything. Every version of himself across every timeline, all the laughter, all the pain, all the love that survived, even when the universe didn't deserve it. And through it all, one simple truth. Every hug ever given mattered. Every one of them was a thread in something larger. When the light faded, Morty was alone again. The other him was gone, or rather within. He could feel it, like a warmth beneath his ribs. Rick approached quietly. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were damp. "You merged," he said softly. Morty nodded. "Yeah, I think I needed to." Rick looked away for a long moment. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "You know, I don't remember the last time I hugged my Morty, not really." Morty smiled faintly. "You could change that." Rick stared at him for a long time. The space around them flickered. More Ricks and Mortys finding each other, merging into light. The room hummed like a lullaby for all their versions. Then slowly Rick stepped forward. "This doesn't mean anything cosmic," he muttered. Morty chuckled softly. "Yeah, I know. Just science, right?" Rick rolled his eyes, but then he leaned in, and for the first time in a very long time he wrapped his arms around Morty. It was clumsy and a little stiff, but it was real. The kind of real that trembles. For a heartbeat, the entire field paused. The air went still. Then a wave of soft blue light rippled outward from them, expanding through every corner of the interverse. Every remaining pair, every forgotten self, seemed to feel it too, merging faster now, one universe at a time. Rick didn't say anything. Morty didn't either. They just stood there, two figures holding on to something infinitely fragile and impossibly eternal. When they finally let go, the air around them glowed with the faint shimmer of 1,000 completed reunions. The multiverse felt quieter now, not empty, but full. Full of the memory of being held. Rick cleared his throat, pretending not to notice the moisture in his eyes. "All right," he muttered. "No more sentimental crap. We've got a lot of collapsing realities left to walk through." Morty smiled softly. "Yeah, Rick, sure." They turned toward the fading light, and as they walked, the ground beneath them hummed like a heartbeat again. Somewhere behind them, June's voice drifted through the folds of reality, barely more than a whisper. Carried on the breath of dissolving stars. "Every hug is an equation," she murmured, "and love is what solves it." Rick didn't look back, but his steps for once were gentle. The next morning, if it could even be called morning anymore, the world had lost its corners. The air moved differently, bending in places where it should have been still, like the universe itself was sighing in its sleep. Morty woke to the sound of nothingness. Even silence had texture here, a faint hum that stretched endlessly across the edges of perception. Rick stood a few feet away, looking out into what used to be the horizon. Now it was a slow ripple of color, dark indigo melting into violet, then into something wordless and bright. The boundaries between sky and ground were dissolving, the two trading places in a lazy, eternal dance. It was beautiful in a sad, broken way, like the universe had finally stopped pretending to hold itself together. Morty rubbed his eyes. "Rick, is it supposed to look like that?" Rick didn't turn around. "No, Morty, nothing's supposed to look like that. Space isn't unraveling, and it's exhaling." Morty blinked. "Exhaling?" "Yeah," Rick's voice was low, almost kind. "Every system, every pattern, every damn atom. They hold their breath for eons, keeping everything in balance. But eventually even the universe gets tired of structure. It lets go, breathes out. That's what you're seeing." Morty stood quietly beside him, watching the world breathe. It was oddly soothing, the way everything softened, edges fading into whispers of light. A floating rock drifted past them, breaking into particles of dust that shimmered like tiny stars before disappearing completely. "Feels like it's all slowing down," Morty said. Rick finally looked at him. "It is. Time's unraveling too. When space gets tired, time follows." Morty frowned, but not out of fear. More like someone trying to understand a lullaby sung in another language. "So, what happens to us?" Rick smiled faintly, lines around his eyes deepening. "We exist slower. Feel more, think less. Maybe that's not a bad thing." They began walking, or something like walking. The ground beneath them pulsed softly, bending underfoot like the surface of a dream. Every step left a faint trail of light that hovered for a while before fading away. Morty noticed how Rick's footprints glowed longer than his. "Rick, do you think it hurts?" Rick raised an eyebrow. "What, the unraveling?" "Yeah," Morty's voice was quiet. "Do you think the universe feels pain when it falls apart?" Rick didn't answer for a long time. The silence stretched, filled only by the soundless hum of space loosening its threads. Finally, he said, "I think pain is just the sound of something remembering it used to be whole." Morty nodded, eyes glistening faintly. "Then maybe it's not pain at all. Maybe it's memory." Rick almost smiled. "Maybe you're smarter than you look, kid." They walked deeper into the collapsing field. The stars above were moving slower now, dragging faint trails behind them like tired comets. Morty could almost see the pattern forming. The trails connecting, weaving something bigger than chaos. He whispered, "It's like they're making constellations backwards." Rick grunted softly. "Or maybe we're just seeing the old ones dying in reverse." Morty didn't answer. Instead, he stopped and reached out toward one of the glowing trails, his fingers brushing the faint dust of light. For a moment he felt warmth, not from heat but from recognition, a feeling, soft and human, like a hand being held long ago. The trail pulsed once beneath his touch, then dissolved into him. He gasped quietly. "Rick, I think I felt something." Rick turned, watching. "Of course you did. Every light out here, every particle. It's carrying an emotion that didn't know where to go. The universe doesn't waste anything, not even love." Morty closed his eyes and let the next trail brush against his skin. He felt laughter this time, light and brief. A child's laugh. Maybe his own from a world where he'd never left home. Another thread touched him. Sorrow, soft and familiar, like the weight of a goodbye never fully said. "It's like everything that ever felt anything is here," he murmured. Rick's eyes softened. "Yeah, every mistake too." The two of them stood there for what felt like hours, though time had stopped behaving properly. The horizon pulsed brighter, the ripples of color deepening into gold and indigo, twisting like silk. Morty realized he could no longer tell if he was moving forward or standing still. The air itself seemed to cradle them. Then a faint shimmer appeared in front of them, a doorway half-formed, swaying gently like a curtain in a breeze. Beyond it, Morty could see nothing but soft white light, swirling in rhythmic motion. Rick sighed. "Dimensional decay breach. Means another layer's collapsing." Morty tilted his head. "Should we go through it?" Rick looked at him for a long time, then said, "If we stay here, we'll fade. If we go through, maybe we'll remember why we came." They stepped forward. The doorway shimmered around them, humming softly. As Morty passed through, he felt something. A pull, gentle but deep, like gravity made of emotion. His thoughts blurred, replaced by sensations. Laughter, tears, warmth, stars. The sound of June's voice whispering his name somewhere far away. And then, suddenly, they were standing in a vast, open field. The ground shimmered beneath them, made of transparent waves of light. The sky stretched in impossible directions, filled with strands of glowing dust, each one drifting like a thread of music. Morty's breath caught. "What is this place?" Rick looked around slowly. This is what happens when physics gives up trying to explain emotion. The border between space and feeling. Morty knelt, running his hand through the glowing dust. "It's so calm here." "Yeah," Rick said softly. "That's what happens when everything starts forgetting what it was fighting for." They stood there quietly. The threads of light swayed gently, brushing against them like waves. Every so often a faint whisper echoed, not words but tones, half-remembered melodies from forgotten worlds. Morty closed his eyes. "It doesn't feel like it's ending, Rick. It feels like it's resting." Rick looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Maybe that's all endings are, Morty. The universe taking a nap." Morty smiled faintly. "Do you think we'll wake up?" Rick's gaze softened. "I think we already did." The horizon flickered again, colors folding inward, space stretching thin like silk in wind. Morty could see through it now. Faint glimpses of other worlds, other versions of himself. They were all slowing too, eyes closed, at peace. Every laugh, every argument, every wild adventure. It all shimmered now as a kind of echo. The light wasn't fading. It was merging, growing warmer, denser, until the space around them felt like a heartbeat shared by everything that ever existed. Morty felt it in his chest. That rhythm. The pulse of connection. He looked at Rick, and for the first time he didn't see an infinite scientist or a broken genius. He saw someone who was just tired, but at peace with it. Rick exhaled deeply. The air around him glowed. "You hear that, Morty? The sound of the multiverse exhaling?" Morty nodded. "Yeah, it sounds like it's saying, 'Thank you.'" Rick didn't reply, but his eyes shone faintly, catching the last light of a dissolving horizon. The unraveling continued, slow, patient, merciful, and for the first time since the beginning of everything, neither of them tried to stop it. It began with a clock that didn't tick anymore. The hands floated, detached from their center, swaying lazily like they were underwater. Rick stared at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. Morty sat on the edge of a glowing rock nearby, watching him, the light of the collapsing sky shimmering against his face. "Something wrong with it?" Morty finally asked. Rick didn't answer. He reached out, touched the glass, and for a brief second the entire field around them pulsed in response. A faint echo of an old vibration, like the memory of sound. "It's not broken," he said at last. "It's just not needed anymore." Morty frowned. "What do you mean?" Rick's voice grew soft. Time stopped keeping count. The silence between them deepened. Morty waited, sensing something different in Rick's tone, quieter, heavier, like a note that didn't want to be played. The air shimmered faintly. A wave of light drifted by, carrying whispers, laughter, fragments of voices from other timelines. Morty leaned back. "What are they saying?" Rick looked at the light and smiled faintly. "They're remembering." "Remembering what?" "Me." He said it so softly that Morty almost missed it. Morty blinked. "You?" Rick's eyes stayed fixed on the drifting light. "Every version of me had one day. A birthday. Not that I ever cared about it. Usually just another day of avoiding mortality by drowning it in bourbon or math. But in every universe, no matter how different I was, the date was always the same." Morty tilted his head. "When?" Rick's expression darkened, not from sadness, from distance. "Doesn't matter. The multiverse forgot it." "That's the point." Morty was quiet for a moment. "I didn't forget, though." Rick finally turned, eyes dull and glinting at once. "No, Morty, that's the curse. You can't forget something that doesn't exist anymore. You can only remember the echo of forgetting it." Morty didn't fully understand, but he felt it, the ache behind the words, the kind that doesn't live in the mind but in the soul. He stood up and walked over, placing a hesitant hand on Rick's shoulder. The contact was light, but it grounded them both. Then, "Let's remember it anyway," Morty said quietly. Rick almost laughed, a small bitter sound that softened at the edges. "You want to celebrate a ghost of a day, Morty?" "Yeah," Morty said simply. "If it mattered once, it still matters now." Rick stared at him for a moment, as if studying a star he'd seen 1,000 times but never really looked at. Then he sighed and sat down on the glowing ground. "Fine, but we don't have candles. Or cake, or people, or time. All we've got is a collapsing multiverse and your dumb optimism." Morty grinned faintly. "Then that's enough." For a while they just sat there. No sound, no ticking, just the faint hum of the universe folding inward. Morty picked up a small shard of crystal from the ground. It glowed softly in his hand. "We can use this," he said. "As a candle." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Her candle that doesn't burn. Great. Really sets the mood." Morty placed it between them anyway. The shard shimmered with a soft blue light, pulsing in rhythm with something unseen. Rick watched it, eyes unfocused. After a moment, Morty whispered, "How old were you?" Rick smirked slightly. "Old enough to stop counting." "That's not an answer," Rick sighed. "Morty, when you've existed in infinite variations, age becomes irrelevant. Some Ricks died young. Some lived past the heat death of their own realities. Some never lived at all. But if you're asking how old this Rick feels..." He paused. His voice dropped lower, rougher. "Tired. That's the only number that matters," Morty swallowed. The shard's glow flickered, reflecting off Rick's eyes. "Do you wish someone had remembered?" Rick chuckled quietly, almost to himself. "Someone did once, Beth. When she was small, she made me a card with glue and glitter. Said I was her favorite scientist. So I still had that card in a drawer back home." Morty's chest tightened. "You ever tell her that meant something to you?" Rick looked away. "No. I told her glitter was inefficient and the glue formula was wrong. She cried. Then she made me another one next year anyway." Morty smiled sadly. "Guess she didn't care about efficiency." Rick stared at the flickering shard. His voice turned soft, dangerously soft. "You know what's funny, Morty? Across every timeline, every variation of me had that same damn card. Different handwriting, different color, same message. Like the multiverse wanted to make sure I never forgot what love looks like. Even when I pretended not to care, Morty felt something in his throat tighten. Then maybe this isn't a forgotten birthday, Rick. Maybe it's... All of them remembering at once. Rick chuckled again, but this time there was no bitterness, just exhaustion that somehow sounded peaceful. You always were better at this emotional crap, kid. They sat in silence for a while longer. The shard between them pulsed brighter, casting soft shadows on their faces. Morty closed his eyes, and for a moment, he imagined what it might have been like. Rick surrounded by people who cared, laughing, maybe even smiling without regret. The hum of the collapsing world deepened, resonating like a low heartbeat beneath them. Rick finally broke the silence. Do you ever think, Morty, that maybe the multiverse doesn't forget anything? Maybe it just folds the memories somewhere we can't reach until we're quiet enough to hear them. Morty opened his eyes slowly. Yeah, I think that's what this place is, the part of everything that remembers. Rick nodded, eyes half closed. Then maybe this isn't my birthday being forgotten. Maybe it's being remembered by everything else. The light of the shard flickered again, once, twice, then split into smaller fragments, each one drifting upward like tiny glowing petals. Morty watched them rise. They look like candles, he whispered. Rick tilted his head. Multiversal fireflies. Guess that's close enough. They watched the fragments drift higher, disappearing into the slow swirl of collapsing stars above. Rick leaned back, resting on his elbows, gaze lost in the sky. Thanks for whatever this is, he said finally. Morty smiled softly. It's your birthday, Rick. You don't have to thank me. Rick gave a small laugh. Funny thing, Morty. Every version of me probably forgot this day. You're the only one who didn't. Guess that makes me special, huh? Rick looked at him, really looked at him, and for the briefest second his usual sharpness melted away. Yeah, guess it does. The space around them shimmered faintly, colors folding and unfolding like quiet breaths. The air was heavy with something unspoken. Not sadness, not joy, but a kind of stillness that comes after understanding. Rick lay back fully, hands behind his head, staring up at the dissolving constellations. Morty joined him. The universe above pulsed like a living thing. For the first time, Rick didn't try to analyze it. He just watched. Happy birthday, Rick, Morty whispered. Rick's voice came out barely audible. Thanks, kid. Feels like the first one that actually means something. As they lay there, the stars began to move slower, their light blending into a single soft pulse that filled the sky. The shard fragments had disappeared completely, or maybe they'd become part of that light. Part of the memory the universe had decided to keep, and for one infinite, vanishing moment, Rick Sanchez, the man who outran death gods, and meaning itself, simply closed his eyes, not to escape, but to rest. There was a field at the edge of the collapsing sky, soft, unending, shimmering with gentle threads of light that whispered when you walked through them. Rick and Morty stepped carefully, as if moving through someone's dream. The air hummed faintly, a lullaby of frequencies overlapping, folding into each other. Each sound was almost a word, almost a memory. Morty spoke first, his voice small. It feels like... The air's talking. Rick didn't answer. He was listening, really listening. The way he used to listen to equations forming in his head, the way a child might listen for the sea inside a shell. His brow softened. It's not the air, he murmured. It's her, Morty blinked. June? Rick nodded. Or all the versions of her. A shape began to emerge from the light, delicate, shifting, made of reflections and echoes. It wasn't solid, not quite. The outline of a girl flickered in and out of visibility, her voice coming not from her mouth but from everywhere at once. Rick, Morty, she whispered, and the sound rippled across the horizon like wind over water. Morty's heart tightened. June. Her smile was faint, made of light. You're hearing me through time, through memory, through every version that ever was. Don't be afraid if I sound different. Rick tilted his head, studying the phenomenon with a kind of reverent skepticism. You always did have a flair for metaphysics. June laughed softly, and her laughter broke into 1,000 tiny echoes, like wind chimes drifting in an invisible breeze. I'm not one person anymore, Rick. I'm what's left when connection refuses to die. Morty looked around. The entire field seemed to shimmer in response to her words. Every thread of light pulsed in rhythm with her tone, gentle, alive, familiar. What is this place? June's voice layered into harmony, as if 1,000 Junes were answering at once. It's the space between versions, The place where everything overlaps, where every goodbye becomes the same hello. Every sound you make here is remembered by someone, somewhere. Rick's gaze softened, though he tried to hide it with a half-smile. So what are you now, a ghost? A collective hallucination. June's form flickered, her eyes glinting with warmth. Something smaller, something quieter. I'm the breath between timelines, the part that carries meaning after everything else collapses. Morty felt a lump in his throat. You're beautiful like this. June's laugh came again. Not one sound, but 1,000 small versions of it, some brighter, some distant, some almost gone. Thank you, Morty. I think beauty is what happens when things stop trying to last. They stood there for a while, letting the hum of voices surround them. The field shifted subtly. Every step they took caused waves of memory to ripple through it. Morty saw fragments of faces in the light, Rick's and Morty's he didn't recognize, all moving in silence, all looking peaceful. Rick turned slowly, scanning the horizon. You called us here for a reason, didn't you? June nodded, though her movement looked more like a ripple through air than a nod. To listen. To remember what listening sounds like. Rick frowned slightly. You think we don't listen? Her 1,000 voices came softly, overlapping like overlapping heartbeats. You hear. But you don't listen to silence. You fill it with noise, invention, excuses. But silence remembers things words forget. Morty took a step closer. So we're supposed to just stand here. June's light shimmered. Not stand, rest. Every version of you is looking for meaning. This is where they find it. In stillness, Rick sighed. Figures. The one place in the multiverse where I can't outthink my problems. June smiled faintly. You've spent infinite lifetimes trying to fix yourself through brilliance. Maybe it's time to let yourself be unfixed. Morty looked up at her, the light of her form reflecting in his eyes. June, do you remember us? Like really remember? Her glow dimmed almost tenderly. I remember the feeling of you. The warmth, the laughter, the way you both looked at the same sky but saw different infinities. That memory survived the collapse because it wasn't attached to form, only to love. Rick's voice softened. Love's just a word that changes shape depending on who's saying it. June tilted her head. Maybe. But in every universe, you still made Morty breakfast when he couldn't sleep. You still stood in front of danger without thinking. You still kept trying, even when pretending not to care. That's what love looks like from the inside. Rick swallowed, eyes darting away. You're projecting meaning where there isn't any. June's voice grew quieter, closer. Then why are you trembling? Rick froze. His hand, half hidden in his coat pocket, was indeed shaking slightly. Morty pretended not to notice. June continued, her 1,000 voices blending into one. Every version of you carries guilt like a relic. Every Morty carries hope like a curse. But here in this field you can lay both down. Morty exhaled slowly. How? June reached out, or perhaps the light around her reached, and brushed Morty's cheek with warmth. By forgiving the parts of yourself that never learned how to rest. The words sank into him like a lullaby. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he saw every version of himself, frightened, brave, cruel, kind, all standing quietly under the same silver sky. And then, one by one, they began to sit, to breathe, to let go. Rick watched silent. June turned toward him, her voice softer than ever. Are you too, Rick? Rick's lips twitched. You're asking a man who built godlike engines out of shame to forgive himself. That's rich. June's form flickered closer, her voice wrapping around him. Not forgive for what you did. Forgive for how long you believed you couldn't change. Rick opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The field shimmered faintly, and in the reflection of one of the light threads, he saw himself, not the scientist, not the cynic, but a tired man who once wanted to hold something and not break it. His throat tightened. Maybe I just don't know how. June's voices, now a whisper, replied, then start by listening. The field pulsed brighter. Every thread of light began to hum in harmony, each tone blending into something like a heartbeat. The air warmed. Morty stood still, feeling it pass through him, and then from every direction the 1,000 voices spoke together. Thank you for remembering us. Rick and Morty turned slowly. The field around them was filled with faces, reflections of people they'd met, lost, loved, or forgotten. Each one smiled softly, eyes closed as if drifting toward rest. June's figure began to dissolve, her edges breaking into pure luminescence. "I have to go soon," she whispered. "But don't mistake this for an ending. It's only what happens when everything becomes one song." Morty's voice trembled. "Will we see you again?" June's smile was like moonlight on water. "You always do." In silence. In reflection. In every quiet thing that still loves you back. And then she was gone, her light folding into the threads of the field. Her thousand voices echoing faintly like distant lullabies. Rick stood motionless for a long time. Morty waited beside him. The air was warm now, like after rain. Finally, Rick spoke almost to himself. "Guess she really did become everything." Morty nodded. Or maybe everything became her. They started walking again, slowly, quietly through the whispering field. Behind them, the light threads dimmed one by one until only their faint footprints remained. And somewhere in the distance, a single lingering voice whispered, not to be heard, but to be felt. "Rest now. You're already home." The map had almost disintegrated by the time they reached the horizon, its edges frayed into threads of light, its ink fading into memory. Rick unfolded what remained of it on the hood of his portal car, the surface glowing faintly beneath his trembling fingers. Morty stood beside him, wrapped in the silence of a sky that no longer bothered pretending to hold stars. The heavens now pulsed like breathing glass, soft, uneven, tired. "There," Rick muttered, tapping the last mark on the fading paper. "The end of the map. Whatever's past this point, no one's ever drawn." Morty leaned closer. The last symbol wasn't a place. It was a circle with a small light in its center. "Looks like a lantern," he whispered. Rick's eyes narrowed. "Or an idea that refuses to go out." The wind carried their words away, blending them with the sound of distant echoes, voices of other selves still wandering somewhere between existence and forgetting. The air felt warm, though no sun burned above them. The multiverse itself seemed to exhale, tired but peaceful. Morty looked at Rick, eyes soft. "You think we'll find it?" "The lantern?" Rick shrugged, but his voice was gentle. "We'll find something. We always do." They walked. Not through space, not through time, but through memory's last stretch where every step left ripples of light instead of footprints. Around them floated fragments of what once were worlds. A school hallway with lockers opening by themselves, a half-dismantled portal gun, a bedroom ceiling covered in glow-in-the-dark stars. All of it drifted quietly in the dim air, as though reluctant to fully disappear. Rick moved with his usual briskness, though his shoulders sagged slightly. Morty followed in silence, sensing the weight behind his grandfather's steps. He could tell Rick was fighting the temptation to rationalize everything, to name the phenomenon, to measure it, to make it small enough to understand. But this wasn't a place that needed understanding. It only needed presence. At some point they stopped on the edge of an invisible field. A soft glow shimmered in the distance, a pinpoint of light steady as a heartbeat. "There," Morty breathed. Rick nodded wordlessly. The glow pulsed once, twice, as if acknowledging them. It was so small, and yet, in the endless quiet of collapsing universes, it felt infinite. They approached slowly. The landscape beneath their feet shifted with every step, showing glimpses of old memories, laughter at the kitchen table, a portal gone wrong, a broken spaceship mended in the rain. It was as though the path itself wanted to remind them of who they'd been before they reached what they were about to find. The lantern sat at the center of a shallow pool of stillness. It wasn't metal or glass. It seemed to be made from thought, shaped by patience. Inside it, light flowed like liquid memory. Morty knelt down. The reflection on the surface wasn't his face. It was every version of him that ever existed, young, old, terrified, hopeful, all looking back at him, all calm. None of them were speaking, but their eyes said enough. Rick stood behind him, silent. For once he didn't move closer, didn't touch, didn't analyze. He just watched the light flicker across Morty's features. His jaw clenched softly, as though holding back words too fragile to say aloud. "What do you think it is?" Morty asked, still watching the lantern. Rick's voice came low. "I think it's the thing that outlasts everything else." Morty looked up. "Like love." Rick exhaled a quiet laugh, one that almost cracked into sadness. "Something like that, or memory. Or maybe they're the same thing when you've seen enough universes fall apart." The air around them deepened into blue. The multiverse was folding faster now, each dimension becoming thinner, more translucent. They could see flickers of alternate selves through the air. Other Ricks and Mortys walking the same path, arriving at the same lantern. In every reflection they were slightly different, but the feeling was the same. Peace. Morty touched the base of the lantern. It was warm, alive. "Do you think it's waiting for us?" Rick crossed his arms, eyes softening. "No, I think it's remembering us." The words hung there, slow and heavy. Morty closed his eyes. "What happens if it goes out?" Rick hesitated. "Then maybe it all ends. Or maybe it just becomes something we don't need to name anymore." A faint hum began to rise from the lantern, gentle, rhythmic. The light brightened slightly, reflecting across the surface of the pool. The sound was familiar, though Morty couldn't place it at first. Then he realized it was laughter. Not loud, not forced, but soft and distant. The kind that came after years of forgiveness. June's voice shimmered faintly in the air, woven through the sound. Every light that ever existed was borrowed from another. None of it ever truly ends. Rick looked up sharply, searching for her, but saw only the rippling air. Her voice came again, softer now. "You don't need to carry everything, Rick. You only need to remember how to rest." Morty glanced at his grandfather. Rick's eyes were glassy, fixed on the lantern. "I don't know if I remember how," he whispered. June's echo faded, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt sacred. Morty reached out and took Rick's hand. The scientist didn't pull away. For a long time, they simply stood there, the old man and the boy, hand in hand, breathing with the rhythm of the light. As they watched, the lantern pulsed one final time, brighter than before, yet softer somehow. It wasn't blinding, it was welcoming. The light expanded outward, touching their faces, their shadows, their thoughts, and suddenly Morty understood. The lantern wasn't at the end of the map. It was the map. The final destination wasn't a place, but a way of seeing. Every version of them, across every collapsing timeline, was converging here not to escape the end, but to finally arrive. Rick's voice broke the silence, low and raw. "Guess this is it, huh?" "The end of everything." Morty smiled faintly, his eyes still closed. "Nah, maybe it's the beginning of being okay with it." Rick let out a quiet breath. For the first time in countless lifetimes, it didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like release. The lantern began to rise slowly, lifting from its still pool. Its light spread outward in circles, through broken realities, through dreamlike skies, through the cracks between what was and what could be. Everywhere it went, things softened. Sharp edges turned to warmth. Echoes turned to hums. Endings turned to sleep. Rick and Morty stood there until the light reached them fully. Rick whispered, "You did good, kid." Morty's voice was steady. "So did you, Rick." The light engulfed them, not burning, not erasing, just folding them gently into its glow. The pool faded. The map dissolved. The field of memory exhaled, and then there was only quiet. A quiet that didn't need to explain itself. A quiet that sounded like home. Silence isn't empty. That's the first thing Morty realizes when the light fades. It has weight, temperature, even texture, like soft static against the skin. The lantern's glow has dissolved, leaving behind a wide expanse that looks like fog made of memory. Every breath echoes faintly, as though the air itself remembers how sound used to move through it. Rick stands a few feet away, half-shadowed, his outline flickering between versions, young, old, mechanical, broken, healed. Morty watches each form overlap and fade until only one remains, the one that looks tired but human. "Rick?" Morty calls quietly. Rick doesn't answer. He's staring at his hands, flexing them as though trying to feel something he's forgotten. The space around them hums with distant echoes, laughter, weeping, old arguments, the faint clink of bottles. Then all of it fades again until only the hush remains. Morty takes a step closer. "Where are we now?" Rick's reply comes slow, thoughtful. "Between things. Between every word we ever said and every one we didn't." The silence deepens. It's not frightening, it's patient. Morty realizes that for the first time, there's nothing left to fix. No disaster to chase, no portal to jump through. Every instinct inside him wants to fill the quiet with questions, with noise. But something in the air tells him not to. He exhales and lets the words die before they form. The fog shifts, responding to his stillness. Faint shapes move through it, silhouettes of moments rather than people. There's a memory of summer light through a window, a half-heard laugh, the feeling of being held. They pass by gently like fish through shallow water. Rick looks around, eyes narrowing. This is new. No equations, no data, no feedback, just... He trails off. Morty finishes softly. Just being here. Rick looks at him then as if noticing his grandson for the first time in hours, or maybe centuries. You sound different, he murmurs. Morty shrugs. I think I'm just tired of running away from things that already happened. Rick gives a small, uneven smile. That's one hell of a graduation speech. Morty laughs quietly. The sound ripples through the air like a small stone dropped into infinite water. The ripples don't vanish. They blend into the silence, becoming part of it. The quiet isn't an absence anymore. It's a container, holding every sound softly inside itself. They walk through the haze together. There's no sense of direction, yet every step feels like movement towards something. The fog parts occasionally to reveal fragments of what once was. The garage where they built the portal gun. The school hallway where Morty hid from bullies. A single kitchen chair in sunlight. Morty stops beside the chair. On it lies a folded note. The handwriting is Rick's. He hesitates, then opens it. It reads, "Every version of me tries to fix the silence. None of us ever learn that it doesn't need fixing." Morty looks up at Rick, eyes wet. "Did you write this?" Rick studies the note as if seeing his own thoughts for the first time. "I think. A version of me did. Maybe one that finally shut up long enough to listen." They both laugh softly. The kind of laughter that doesn't hurt. As they continue walking, the haze around them begins to pulse faintly with color. Soft blues, pale violets, the kind of shades that exist only in dreams. Morty feels lighter with every step, as if pieces of worry are gently unthreading from his chest. The silence begins to hum, deep and resonant, like the inside of a seashell. It's not sound exactly, yet its presence. Morty closes his eyes and lets it fill him. The hum matches his heartbeat, then slows it, calming it. He opens his eyes to see something ahead, a wide mirror made of still air. Its surface ripples with faint light. Without thinking, he steps closer. The reflection isn't just him. It's every version of him, scared, angry, brave, kind. Each reflection moves at its own pace, but slowly they begin to breathe together, in unison. Rick stands beside him, looking at his own reflection. 1,000 Ricks, all slightly different. Some cruel, some gentle, some crying quietly. None of them are speaking. For the first time in eternity, they all seem to understand each other without words. Morty whispers, "They're listening too." Rick nods. "Guess it took the end of everything for us to shut up long enough to hear ourselves." The silence swells again, warm and full. June's voice flickers through it, faint as a sigh. Silence is where the universe keeps its memories. Morty closes his eyes, feeling the truth of it settle deep in his bones. He remembers all the noise, the screams, the explosions, the endless running, and realizes that every sound was just a way of trying not to feel small. But here in this infinite hush, smallness feels sacred. It feels honest. Rick sits down on the non-existent floor. "You know," he mutters, "I used to hate quiet. Always made me think too much." Morty sits beside him. "And now?" Rick looks out into the fog, his eyes soft. "Now I think maybe the universe was quiet all along. I was just too loud to notice." They sit together for what could be minutes or millennia. There's no time here, only rhythm. The rise and fall of breath. The faint pulse of light that seems to beat in sync with them. After a long while, Morty speaks again. "Do you think it's over, Rick? Like all of it? The universes, the stories, everything?" Rick doesn't answer right away. Then he says almost tenderly, "Maybe it's not over. Maybe it's just resting." "Even infinity needs a nap sometimes," Morty smiles. "Yeah, like us." Rick leans back, eyes half closed. "Don't get all philosophical on me, kid. I'm still the smartest man in no universes." Morty laughs again, softer this time. The sound fades into the hum and becomes part of it. He looks around and notices something new. The fog isn't fog anymore. It's dissolving into starlight. Tiny points of brightness begin to form in the distance, slowly, like embers being born from still air. Each star is silent, but each silence feels alive. Rick watches the forming constellations. "Guess even the void can't resist trying to tell a story." Morty nods, eyes shining. Or maybe it's remembering one. They sit together beneath the newborn light. The silence around them isn't lonely anymore. It's luminous, endless, and kind. Every thought, every mistake, every version of who they were seems to settle softly into that stillness, forgiven without being forgotten. Morty closes his eyes, feeling his heartbeat sink with the quiet. "You know, Rick, I don't think we have to say anything else." Rick's voice comes low, fading into the hum. "Yeah, kid, maybe that's the point." And with that, they stop talking. The silence listens back. It stretches outward, not as a void, but as a gentle presence that touches every fragment of the multiverse. In that stillness, echoes breathe. Old pain dissolves, and what remains isn't noise or speech or even thought. It's peace. For the first time, Morty isn't afraid of quiet. He knows it won't forget him, and so he listens, truly listens, to the silence between worlds, and hears something beautiful. The sound of everything finally resting. There's a kind of quiet that feels like it's been waiting forever for words. Not demanding them, just waiting, patient as moonlight across an old table. That's the quiet Rick and Morty find themselves in. The stars above are no longer infinite. They hover low, pulsing slowly like breathing embers. Everything smells faintly of ozone and dust, like the air after a storm that never quite happened. Morty sits cross-legged beside Rick, tracing patterns in the dust that drifts around their feet. He's thinking about all the versions of them that must have ended by now, all the echoes folding into one another, the laughter and pain reduced to the same hum. Rick hasn't spoken for a long time. His silence feels heavier than the universe itself. Finally, Morty says, "You're quiet again." Rick breathes out, the sound brittle and human. "For once, I don't have anything left to argue with." The stars flicker in response like they're listening. Rick looks up at them. His face is older here, not by years but by wear. The edges of his voice are softer when he speaks again. "You know, kid, there's this equation I've been running for decades. Not on paper, not even in code. Just," he taps his temple, "in here. That's the one that tries to prove that every mistake I ever made was necessary. That all the pain added up to something useful. I could never balance it. Never found the constant that made it make sense." Morty doesn't answer. He's learned that some moments need silence the way a plant needs shadow. Too much light and the truth burns out. Rick keeps talking, slower now. "Every version of me thought he was the only one who got it right. That's the curse, Morty. You split across infinite universes, and every Rick swears he's the real one. But when they start collapsing, you realize..." He pauses, staring at his hands again. "You realize none of us were right. We were just loud." Morty looks up, his voice soft. "Loud about what?" Rick's lips twitch. "About not wanting to be alone." The admission hangs there, fragile and glowing. It doesn't sound like an explosion. It sounds like a sigh that's been held for centuries finally let go. Morty swallows. "I didn't think you'd ever say something like that." Rick chuckles weakly. "Neither did I, but the multiverse has a way of shutting a man up." They both fall silent again. The stars pulse gently, as though sinking to their breaths. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of the collapsing universes begins to slow. Rick leans back on his hands, gazing upward. "When I was younger, or one of me was, I built machines to escape consequence. Thought if I kept moving, the past couldn't catch up. But every universe you run to carries the echo of the last. You can't out-engineer grief, Morty. It just waits." Morty watches his reflection shimmer faintly in the dust. "Then why keep running?" Rick smirks. "Because the running was easier than stopping." Morty studies him for a long moment. Rick's face, usually sharp with sarcasm, looks soft, nearly childlike under the starlight. His eyes, the eyes that have seen everything, are distant but not cold. They seem to be looking through memory itself. Rick takes a slow breath. "You know the first portal gun? The one that started all of this?" "Yeah. I built it to find her again, Diane. I told myself it was about science, about discovery, but it wasn't. I just couldn't accept that something could end without my permission." Morty nods quietly. "You never told me that before." Rick looks down at him, expression unreadable. "Didn't think you were ready to hear it." "Hell, I wasn't ready to say it." The stars blink in rhythm with his words. The hum deepens, vibrating softly through the air. "I thought if I could make infinite versions of her, infinite versions of everything, then I wouldn't have to feel the hole she left. But it doesn't work that way. You multiply the worlds, you multiply the grief, too. Infinite goodbyes, infinite almosts." Morty stares into the glowing air, his voice barely audible. "But you found me." Rick looks at him, really looks at him. For once, there's no irony in his eyes, only quiet understanding. Yeah, I did. They sit together and the silence thickens again. Not heavy, just deep like an ocean that goes on forever. Morty can feel something in Rick softening, like an old wound finally unclenching. Rick's voice comes low. You know what the funniest part is? Out of all the things I've destroyed, all the universes I've broken, you're the only thing I couldn't unmake. Not because of science, not because of some cosmic law. Just because I didn't want to. Morty blinks, surprised by the weight of the words. Rick waves him off gently, but his hand trembles. Don't get all sentimental on me, kid. I'm not dying, just finally telling the truth. He leans back, eyes half closed. The starlight glints on his face, tracing the lines carved by time and regret. I used to think love was just biology, a glitch that kept idiots from evolving past attachment. But it's not, Morty, it's gravity. It's what pulls everything back together, even when it falls apart. Morty doesn't know what to say. He feels like if he speaks, the moment will shatter. So he doesn't, he just listens. Rick smiles faintly as if relieved. That's the thing, kid. You finally learned how to listen. They sit in stillness, surrounded by infinite versions of light, fragments of universes fading like distant dreams. Rick tilts his head back, eyes drifting closed. Every version of me tried to outsmart the end. But maybe the point wasn't to win or to survive. Maybe it was just to understand what it meant to care, even when everything breaks. Morty feels tears sting the edges of his eyes. You think that's what all this collapse is about? Understanding? Rick's voice is almost gone, a whisper beneath the hum. No, acceptance. For a long moment they breathe in unison, and it feels like the entire multiverse is breathing with them. Then Rick says something so quiet, it almost disappears before it reaches Morty's ears. I'm sorry, kid, for all of it. Morty looks at him, at the man who taught him how to run from everything, and finally understands that this apology isn't a fix. It's a release. He nods, his own voice trembling. It's okay, Rick. You don't have to carry it anymore. Rick exhales. It's the deepest breath he's ever taken, and when he lets it out, the stars around them brighten. The hum grows warmer, softer. Not like machinery, but like the sound of someone falling asleep beside you. The universe itself seems to sigh. Rick opens one eye, smirks faintly. You know, Morty, if I'd known all it took to balance the equation was saying sorry, I would have done it a few billion universes ago. Morty laughs, a quiet, honest laugh that melts into the stillness. Guess you finally solved it, huh? Rick closes his eyes again. Nah, I just stopped needing to. The starlight fades to a gentle glow, and the silence settles over them once more. Not empty, not cold, but full of every word that never needed to be said. And for the first time in any universe, Rick Sanchez rests. It began as a shimmer in the air, faint, almost imperceptible. A pulse that felt more like a thought than a sound. Morty noticed it first, though he couldn't tell if it came from the stars or from somewhere deep inside himself. Rick was lying beside him, half asleep, half aware, his breathing slow, uneven, but peaceful, in a way Morty had never seen before. Across the dim horizon, lights began to appear, millions of soft glows, each one the hue of a memory. They floated like lanterns adrift on invisible tides, and within each Morty could sense a presence, a version of Rick, somewhere between waking and dreaming. Some were tinkering with phantom gadgets, some were laughing softly at their own jokes. Some just sat, eyes closed, their faces slack with rest. It was strange to see infinity getting sleepy. Morty stood quietly, afraid that if he moved too suddenly, the vision might dissolve. The stars above seemed to fold inward, curling around them like a blanket. The hum of collapsing timelines had quieted into something steady, rhythmic, like the slow heartbeat of the cosmos. Rick stirred beside him and opened one eye. Guess it's happening, huh? Morty looked around. What's happening? Rick's smile was faint but real. All of me. Finally shutting up. Morty wanted to laugh, but it caught in his throat. There was something beautiful about the sight. All those versions of Rick, scattered across universes, each beginning to drift into sleep at the same time. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't destruction. It was harmony, the kind that comes only after exhaustion, after centuries of noise. Do you feel them? Morty asked. Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, it's weird. It's like I can hear every mistake I ever made whispering itself to sleep. The air shimmered with faint light. Morty could almost make out voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, murmuring like waves on the edge of consciousness. Each one was a fragment of a story, an unfinished apology, a laugh that had echoed across worlds. They overlapped and blurred until they became one soft, endless sound, a lullaby. Morty closed his eyes and listened. The sound wasn't made of words. It was made of acceptance, that quiet understanding that nothing needed to be fixed anymore. Everything had already been forgiven. Rick sat up slowly, his gaze wandering through the drifting lights. He raised a hand and brushed one with his fingertips. It flickered gently, and for an instant Morty saw a younger Rick inside it, hair darker, eyes brighter, sitting at a workbench, humming as he worked. Then the light dimmed and the image vanished. "Guess that was me once," Rick murmured, "before I started building my own cages." Morty hesitated, then said softly, "You built a lot of doors, too." Rick looked at him, surprised. "Doors? Yeah. You said once that every portal was an escape, but I think maybe it was a way to reach yourself. Even if it took a billion tries." Rick chuckled weakly. "You're getting too poetic for your own good, kid." "Yeah," Morty said, smiling faintly. "Wonder where I learned that." Rick leaned back, exhaling deeply. "You know, if I'd known the multiverse was just going to end in a giant nap, I might have stopped running sooner." The sky rippled like silk in the wind. The lights began to draw closer together, merging, overlapping, until they formed slow-moving constellations. Each point of light was a memory, a self, a story, and together they painted something that looked almost like a face. Morty realized, with a quiet ache, that it was Rick's face, not one version, but all of them. The infinite Ricks folding into one gentle expression, peaceful and still. He turned to his Rick. "You see that?" Rick's eyes were half closed. "Yeah, looks better than I remember." Morty could feel it, the pull, the quiet gravity of unity. Every version of Rick, across time and dimension, surrendering at last to stillness. The portal colors dimmed. The echoes of laughter softened into breath. Even the ground beneath them seemed to settle, as though the fabric of reality itself was finally exhaling. Rick's voice came low, nearly lost in the hum. "I used to think sleep was a waste of time. Thought if I stayed awake long enough, I could outsmart the universe. Turns out the universe was just waiting for me to close my eyes." Morty didn't know what to say. He reached out and rested a hand on Rick's arm. The contact was simple, wordless, and yet it carried everything that needed to be said. Rick smiled faintly. "You're not bad company, kid. Even at the end of everything." Morty looked at him, eyes glimmering in the starlight. "It's not the end, just rest." Rick sighed, his eyelids fluttering. "You sound like her." "Who?" "June." His voice was fading now. "She used to tell me that rest wasn't giving up. It was remembering where you came from." Morty nodded slowly. Though Rick might not have heard him, all around them the glowing Ricks began to settle. Some curled up on fragments of broken labs. Others floated in zero gravity, their eyes closed, drifting through weightless constellations. The multiverse, once a roar of contradictions and chaos, had become a cradle. Even the stars seemed tired now. Their light pulsed slower, dimmer, until each one matched the steady rhythm of Rick's breathing. Morty could feel it, a million heartbeats aligning into one vast pulse. The hum deepened. The air shimmered like a dream. Rick opened his eyes one last time and looked at Morty. For a moment there was that familiar glint, curiosity, defiance, the spark that had burned through eternity. But it softened almost immediately, replaced by something gentler. "Don't wake me up too soon, okay?" he murmured. Morty smiled. "I won't." Rick closed his eyes and the light around them began to dim. Not fade, just settle like twilight on calm water. Morty sat beside him, watching as the universe folded itself into silence. He could see reflections within reflections. Timelines weaving together until there was no beginning or end, just one vast, eternal moment of rest. He leaned back, letting his own eyes close. The hum was everywhere now, soft, endless, like breathing in unison with the stars. For the first time in his life, Morty wasn't afraid of the dark. He thought of all the versions of Rick he'd seen, the angry ones, the lonely ones, the proud ones, and felt an ache of gratitude. Each one had carried a piece of this final moment. Each had led to this stillness. The air was warm against his skin, like being held by the universe itself. Somewhere far away, he thought he heard June's voice, soft as light. "Everything that ever loved you is still here." Morty smiled in his half-sleep. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know." And as the multiverse drifted into its great slumber, Morty let himself fall with it, not into nothingness, but into everything that had ever been. The hum continued, steady and endless. A lullaby for infinity, and somewhere, deep inside the quiet, a single spark glowed, not to awaken, but to remember. When Morty awoke, the universe was quiet, not the kind of silence that comes after an explosion, but the deep, gentle kind that hums underneath everything. The stars above no longer burned. They glowed softly, suspended in an endless dusk that had no direction, no gravity, no time. He rose slowly, brushing what felt like stardust off his clothes, and saw the landscape around him, a vast plain of shimmering grass that swayed without wind. Each blade shimmered faintly with light, some blue, some gold, some colorless entirely, like whispers of memories turned visible. Rick was still asleep beside him, his chest rising and falling gently. Morty almost didn't want to disturb him, but something in the air was calling. It wasn't sound exactly, more like a melody felt through the bones, 1,000 voices humming in unison, layered over one another, as though the stars themselves were remembering how to speak. He took a step forward. The ground beneath him rippled faintly, like stepping on water that remembered being solid. Each step sent tiny sparks through the grass, and where his feet touched, faint images appeared, echoes of the past. A younger Rick laughing beside a portal. A family dinner from another timeline. A Morty he didn't recognize, holding a broken gadget and crying quietly into the void. The air shimmered with nostalgia, alive with everything that had ever been thought, felt, or forgotten. It wasn't frightening. It was comforting, like walking through the mind of a sleeping god. Then he heard a voice. "Morty!" He turned. It wasn't Rick. The voice came from somewhere behind the light, calm and melodic, as though woven from the same material as the stars themselves. From the horizon, a figure emerged, not walking, not floating, but unfolding from the fabric of light itself. She looked like a woman, though her form flickered between ages and identities, sometimes young, sometimes impossibly old, sometimes not human at all. Her eyes held galaxies, soft and ancient, and her hair drifted like nebulae in slow motion. Who are you?" Morty asked, voice trembling. The figure smiled faintly. "I am what's left of what once dreamed you all into being." Morty blinked, confused. "You mean, you're like God?" Her laugh was quiet and not mocking, just warm. "Names are smaller than what I am. But you can think of me as the memory of creation, the echo that stayed when everything else moved on." She gestured gently toward the sleeping Rick. "And he was my brightest echo." Morty's heart tightened. "You mean Rick?" "Yes," she said softly. "Every version of him was a reflection of the same spark, the mind that could imagine beyond its limits, even when it hurt him. Every invention, every portal, every universe he ever created was a question he asked me. And now he's dreaming the answer." Morty knelt beside Rick, his eyes wet. "He always said he didn't believe in anything like you. He said the universe didn't care." The woman's form flickered, her expression softening. He was right. "The universe doesn't care. But I do." For a moment Morty couldn't breathe. The field around them seemed to pulse in time with her words, light bending and folding, forming faint silhouettes of other beings, other lives. He could see Rick's, thousands of them, sleeping peacefully across the field. And among them countless Mortys, Summers, Beths, Jerrys, all at rest, each one dreaming the same dream. "What is this place?" Morty whispered. She looked around. "The field of remembered voices. It's where every thought, every life, every echo comes to rest, before it becomes something new. Nothing is lost here, Morty, only transformed." He looked down, watching the light flow through the grass. Each flicker was a memory. Laughter, pain, love, regret. He could feel them like waves washing through his chest. "So this is the end?" "No," she said gently. "This is the pause before the next breath." Morty stood there for a long time, trying to understand. Then he asked, "Can he wake up again?" "Rick?" She smiled faintly. "If he chooses to. But every awakening has a cost. Every rebirth forgets something precious." Morty's gaze fell back to Rick. "He's already forgotten enough," the figure nodded. "Then let him rest. The multiverse will remember him. It always remembers what dares to question it. She turned toward the horizon, and the sky began to shimmer again, faint ripples of color spreading like sunrise across water. Morty, you carry what he could not. The wonder that still believes. That is why you're awake when he is not. Morty frowned, unsure. Why me? Her voice softened. Because you listened. He thought of everything that had led here, every world, every horror, every heartbreak. He'd seen infinite Ricks break themselves, trying to control the uncontrollable. But he had also seen beauty in the chaos, quiet moments, fleeting laughter, the fragile love that kept them human. Maybe that was what listening really meant, seeing all of it and choosing to stay. The figure reached out, touching Morty's chest lightly. A warmth spread through him, like sunlight through fog. You will dream too in time, but not yet. Someone must remember how to wake. Her hand began to dissolve into particles of light. Wait, Morty called. Will I see you again? Her voice echoed softly, already fading. I was never gone, Morty. I am the silence between your thoughts, the pause before your next breath. And with that she vanished into the horizon, leaving only light behind. Morty stood there for what felt like forever, listening to the hum of the universe, that same deep vibration he'd heard when everything began to fall asleep. Only now he could understand it. It wasn't just a hum. It was language, the sound of every being remembering who they were. He sat beside Rick again, the grass glowing softly beneath them. Rick's face looked peaceful, almost content, his features softened by the starlight. Morty reached out and took his hand, rough, calloused, but warm. Hey, Rick, he whispered. You can rest. I'll remember for both of us. Above them the stars pulsed faintly, not cold or distant, but alive. The hum of voices rose slightly, then settled again into rhythm. The field of remembered voices breathed with them. Morty closed his eyes. He didn't fall asleep, not yet. He just listened, to the sigh of the cosmos, to the whisper of every forgotten story returning home, and for the first time he didn't feel small in it. He felt part of it. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon, the faint outline of a portal flickered, not green this time, but golden, warm, like dawn through water. It shimmered quietly, patient, waiting. Morty smiled faintly. Not yet, he said. Let him dream a little longer. And with that, the boy and his grandfather lay beneath the soft glow of infinity, one sleeping, one remembering, as the multiverse rested around them, poised at the edge of awakening. The horizon was beginning to blur. It wasn't sunrise or sunset. It was something in between, like time itself had forgotten which direction to flow. The stars were dimming one by one, folding softly into the fabric of the sky. Each disappearance felt like a breath being released. Morty watched them fade while Rick slept beside him, still in that peaceful, unguarded stillness that Morty had never seen before. For a long time, Morty simply sat there, hands wrapped around his knees, listening to the faint hum of the field of remembered voices. The whispers had grown quieter now, not gone but more internal, like they were no longer around him but within him. Every now and then, he'd hear faint laughter, for his own voice calling from another lifetime, and it didn't scare him anymore. Then, softly, the light changed. It began as a faint shimmer across the air, a pulse of color that trembled in the space between breaths. It gathered slowly, tenderly, until it took shape before him. June. She appeared not as a ghost or projection, but as light itself choosing to remember her shape. Her outline flickered in and out of being, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, her voice arriving before her mouth moved, like the world was struggling to synchronize its memories of her. Hey, Morty, she whispered. Morty stood up, heart swelling. June, you came back. She smiled, though her face rippled like water disturbed by wind. Not exactly back, more like passing through. He stepped closer, afraid that if he blinked, she'd vanish. The last time I saw you, you said we were all trying to remember the same dream. June nodded, light shifting gently around her. We still are. Only now the dream is remembering itself. Morty frowned. Is that what's happening? The multiverse collapsing? Not collapsing, she said softly, reaching out a flickering hand that almost touched his. It's becoming whole. Every version of you, every Rick, every me, we're merging. Not disappearing. Just coming home. Her voice had that same warmth it always did, calm, melodic, unhurried. Morty could feel her words more than hear them, vibrating softly in his chest. He swallowed hard. "And you? What happens to you?" She smiled sadly. "I stop being me," Morty shook his head. "That's not fair." Her form flickered brighter for a moment, then softened. "Morty, nothing real is lost. The shapes change, the names fade, but the love remains. I'm not leaving you. I'm just joining everything that ever loved you." He didn't know what to say. The field around them rippled, blades of light bending toward her as if drawn by gravity. She was beginning to dissolve, not painfully, not tragically, but gently, like fog in morning sunlight. "Why does it have to end like this?" he whispered. June tilted her head, smiling faintly. "Because endings are how the universe exhales. You can't hold a breath forever." Morty's voice trembled. "But I don't want you to go." She stepped closer, and though her body was made of light, he could almost feel her presence, a warmth that wrapped around him without touch. "Morty, listen. Every version of me across every world, the ones who helped you, the ones you barely met, the ones who never spoke your name, we all came from the same place. The same thought, the same kindness. I was never just one person." Morty blinked away tears. "Then what are you?" June looked at him, eyes glowing with soft gold. "I'm what the universe feels when it remembers love." The words sank into him like sunlight into deep water. Around them the air shimmered brighter, the field glowing more intensely, as if her truth had awoken something in the stars. Rick stirred faintly behind them, but didn't wake. His breathing was steady, calm. Morty glanced back at him, then returned his gaze to June. "He'll want to see you," he said quietly. June's light dimmed gently, as though her smile carried a trace of sorrow. "He already does. In every version of himself, he's been chasing what I am, the connection he lost when he stopped believing that things could be gentle." Her body began to lose shape, outlines flowing into the air like threads of silk, unraveling in slow motion. Morty felt panic rise in his chest. "Please don't go yet," he said, his voice breaking. She reached toward him again, and this time he felt it, a faint touch, warm and electric, like static and heartbeat combined. Her fingers pressed lightly against his chest, right where his heart was. "Morty," she whispered, "when you wake, you'll feel me here. Every time you forgive yourself, every time you choose to be kind instead of afraid." "That's me. That's all of us." Tears blurred his vision. "What if I forget?" "You won't," she said softly. "Even if your mind forgets, your heart remembers. That's what this place is for, the remembering." He wanted to hold on to her, to anchor her somehow, but the light around her was rising too quickly now. The entire field shimmered with her glow. Thousands of sleeping Ricks and Mortys across the expanse stirred faintly, bathed in gold. The sky folded inward as if bowing to her. "Everything that ever loved you is still here," she whispered, her voice fading into the air. "We're just changing shape." Then, like a sigh, she was gone. The world exhaled with her. Morty sank to his knees, head bowed, breath trembling. The place where she had stood was still glowing faintly, a soft pulse of golden light that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. He touched it with his fingers, and it felt alive, humming quietly under his skin. He didn't cry loudly. He just breathed, slow and quiet, as if he were afraid to disturb the silence she'd left behind. Somewhere far off, 1,000 voices murmured, not in words but in feelings, gratitude, love, release. Rick stirred again, eyes fluttering open. He blinked up at the dimming sky, then at Morty. "What happened?" Morty looked over, his face glowing softly in the reflected light. "She said goodbye." Rick's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where faint golden waves still rippled across the distance. "Yeah," he murmured. "They always do." Morty didn't answer. He just sat beside him, the two of them framed by the soft hum of eternity. After a while, Rick reached into his coat and pulled out a tiny metal device, something broken, dented, and silent. He turned it over in his hand, frowning. Morty watched him. "What is it?" Rick squinted. "Doesn't matter. Just something I was trying to fix." He let it fall into the grass, where it shimmered once and vanished. Then he leaned back, looking up at the endless sky. "You feel that?" Morty nodded. "Yeah, it's peaceful." Rick exhaled softly. "That's rare." The sky rippled again, slow and golden. The hum deepened, resonant, like the whole cosmos was breathing through them. Morty closed his eyes and whispered almost to himself, She said she's not really gone. Rick gave a faint, tired smile. Maybe none of us are. The light faded to a calm, endless dusk. Neither of them spoke again. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It vibrated with everything that had ever mattered, everything that still did. And somewhere just beneath the edge of hearing, June's voice lingered one last time, a lullaby woven through the hum of stars. We are all trying to remember the same dream. And for the first time, Morty understood exactly what she meant. The world was breathing slower now. Each horizon folded inward like the closing of an eye, the lines between night and morning dissolving into a soft, endless grey. There were no stars anymore, only the faint memory of them, drifting like the afterimage of dreams. Rick and Morty sat where the light had faded, surrounded by the quiet hush of a universe preparing to rest. The grass shimmered faintly beneath them, as if remembering the echo of June's glow. The air felt heavy, but not with sorrow. It was the weight of something vast coming to peace with itself. Morty leaned back on his elbows, staring upward. "It's weird," he said softly. "It's like the sky forgot what to show us." Rick's eyes traced the pale expanse above. "Nah, it's remembering what it used to be." He paused, voice lower, more thoughtful. "You ever notice how memories aren't really about what happened? They're about how it felt?" Morty nodded barely. "Like a dream. The edges blur, but you still know it was real." They sat in silence for a long time. Around them the field stretched endlessly, but distances meant nothing anymore. Time had become something warm and fluid. Not gone, just resting. Every few minutes the air shimmered, and Morty could swear he saw outlines of people, versions of themselves walking, sleeping, smiling, fading like ripples into calm water. "Rick," he said after a while, "do you think they're still out there?" "The other us's." Rick's hand rested loosely on his knee. "Not out there anymore," he murmured. "More like, in here." He tapped his chest lightly. "Every choice we made, every timeline we cracked, it's all coming together. Feels like we're being folded back into the same page." Morty frowned, thoughtful. "And what happens when the page closes?" Rick exhaled slowly. "Then we dream." The wind drifted by, soft and circular, carrying whispers like forgotten laughter. Morty thought he could hear their voices, versions of him from other worlds, each one humming the same tune in slightly different ways. It didn't sound like chaos. It sounded like harmony. "It doesn't hurt," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I thought it would." Rick tilted his head. "You were expecting fireworks?" "No, I just thought the end of everything would be louder." Rick chuckled softly, a dry, affectionate sound. "Nah, kid. The universe doesn't explode. It sighs." Something in Morty's chest loosened at that. He lay back fully, feeling the hum beneath his body, a pulse that wasn't his own but somehow felt familiar. The rhythm of the collapsing worlds was slow, steady, and full of memory. For a long moment they simply breathed in unison, their hearts sinking with the quiet pulse of creation folding in on itself. The edges of their forms were beginning to blur, not dissolving but glowing faintly, as if the space between them was melting into one shared outline. Morty lifted his hand, and the air rippled through his fingers like liquid glass. He could see faint reflections, dozens of himself, each from a different time. The Morty who never left home. The Morty who built a ship. The Morty who held Rick's hand as they drifted through dying stars. They all looked back at him, calm and understanding. "You see them?" Rick asked softly. Morty nodded. "Yeah, they're all me." Rick watched the sky where shapes of other Ricks shimmered briefly before vanishing into light. We used to think that made us special, all those versions. Infinite possibilities, infinite screw-ups. But maybe infinity was just the universe's way of showing us how to forgive ourselves. Morty turned to him. "You think that's what this is? Forgiveness?" Rick's voice softened. "Feels like it. Maybe the multiverse wasn't about choices after all. Maybe it was about learning to love every version of what we were." The words hung in the air like the last note of a lullaby. Morty closed his eyes. He could feel warmth spreading through him. Not heat, but comfort, like a blanket made of light. Around them, the field shimmered brighter, and the edges of reality began to curve inward, as if the sky itself was curling into a sphere of memory. Everywhere he looked, the same thing was happening. Mountains melting into clouds, rivers folding into mist, stars condensing into soft beads of golden breath. The multiverse wasn't breaking. It was becoming smaller, gentler, closer to the heart. A faint vibration passed through the air, like the low hum of a sleeping creature. The ground shimmered. Morty sat up, eyes wide, as the horizon began to tilt inward, meeting itself at the edges. Rick didn't move. He just smiled faintly. "This is it," he whispered. "The convergence." Morty felt a strange calm settle over him. "It's beautiful." Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." As the sky folded tighter, the stars, or what was left of them, spiraled into soft threads of gold, weaving across the air like silk strands being gathered by unseen hands. They weren't falling apart. They were weaving together. Morty could see June's light among them, her voice echoing faintly. "Everything that ever loved you is still here." The words rippled through the collapsing world like a promise kept. The ground beneath them began to fade, not disappear but become translucent, like glass illuminated from beneath. Morty could see shapes of other worlds drifting beneath their feet, layered like gentle waves, each one humming the same melody. Rick leaned back, his gaze soft and tired. "Guess it all comes back to one place," he murmured. Morty looked at him. "Where's that?" Rick smiled faintly. "Home." The word echoed through the air, and something inside Morty clicked, a small, quiet understanding that felt older than language. Every version of him, every fragment, every regret. They were all finding their way home. Not to a place, but to a feeling. He reached over and touched Rick's hand. For the first time, Rick didn't pull away. The light around them deepened, wrapping their shapes in a soft golden glow. Their silhouettes merged briefly, not lost but combined, two outlines blending into one gentle radiance. "I'm glad we're together for this," Morty whispered. Rick gave a small nod. "Yeah, me too, kid." The final collapse came like a heartbeat, a pulse of light that rippled through everything. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was simply complete. When Morty opened his eyes again, there was no horizon, no sky, no ground. Only warmth, only the feeling of being surrounded by everything he had ever known. Laughter, sorrow, mistakes, love. It was all there, held softly within him. Rick's voice came faintly, as if from across a dream. "Guess the multiverse finally figured out how to rest." Morty smiled, eyes closed. "Yeah, it feels like home." They floated there together, not as two people, but as the memory of connection, of understanding, of infinite selves finally at peace. The light dimmed gently, not into darkness but into stillness. And in that stillness, Morty heard a final whisper, barely audible, like breath against his ear. "You made it." He didn't know whose voice it was, June's, Rick's, or his own, but it didn't matter. It was all the same now. The multiverse exhaled, and everything, every world, every version, every dream, became one quiet, eternal hum. It didn't feel like the end. It felt like rest. When the light returned, it came not as a flash, but as a breath, soft, silver, and slow. It spread across what used to be space, curling into shapes that felt familiar but could no longer be named. The world had become a garden of memory, though no one had planted it. Each blade of light shimmered like a petal made of thought. Every color was born from a feeling remembered by someone, somewhere. Morty opened his eyes within that glow. He wasn't standing exactly. He was simply there, as if the ground had chosen to rise just enough to hold him. The air felt like velvet, full of whispers, full of everything he'd ever loved. Rick stood beside him, his outline gentle and less defined than before. His lab coat rippled slightly, like smoke that hadn't decided whether to fade or stay. He looked around slowly, eyes half closed, and exhaled through a quiet smile. "Guess this is it," he murmured. "The end of ends." Morty shook his head softly. "It doesn't feel like an ending." Rick tilted his head. "What's it feel like, then?" Morty hesitated. "Like remembering a dream you didn't know you forgot." Around them, the garden unfolded in silence. Each step they took sent tiny ripples through the ground. Not water, not earth, but something in between. Beneath their feet, glowing shapes pulsed gently, like hearts that belonged to forgotten worlds. Morty could feel them, moments from all timelines flowing into one another. Laughter, arguments, small acts of love. Every version of himself, every version of Rick, was blooming somewhere in this field. A soft breeze passed by, carrying faint voices. Morty turned toward it instinctively. The wind seemed to hum with gentle recognition, 1,000 Ricks talking in harmony. 1,000 Mortys laughing faintly at the same old jokes. It was strange yet peaceful. Every echo that had once been lost in the noise of infinity had found its tone in this shared quiet. They walked deeper. The light changed gradually, from silver to soft gold, from gold to violet dusk. Trees appeared, though they weren't made of wood or bark. They were built from strands of light, each branch holding small orbs that shimmered with flickering scenes. Morty approached one and saw his own reflection, a memory of him sitting at the dinner table with his family, listening to his mom laugh. It was so distant, so innocent. He reached toward it, and the orb pulsed gently, showing not one but all the times he'd ever sat at that table, across worlds, across possibilities. In some, the food was different. In others, someone was missing. But the laughter, that stayed the same. Rick watched quietly. "Everything's stored here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Every universe, every decision, every stupid thing I've ever done. It's all blooming like some cosmic scrapbook." Morty smiled faintly. "It's kind of beautiful." Rick chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, never thought I'd say that about anything with my face in it." For a long while they simply wandered. The garden stretched endlessly, but walking didn't feel like traveling anymore. It felt like remembering. Each step opened a new corner of memory, the glow of their first portal, the hum of the ship, the smell of burning circuits and old coffee. Every sound was softer here, gentler, stripped of urgency, left only with meaning. Eventually they reached a small clearing. In its center grew a single tree, taller than the rest. Its trunk was smooth light, its branches curved inward like arms, and its fruit, if that's what it was, shone with a warm, pulsing heartlight. Beneath it was a bench that seemed carved from the color of dawn. Rick sat down slowly, groaning a little out of habit. "You'd think the universe ending would at least fix my back." Morty laughed quietly and joined him. For a while they just sat, listening to the soft rhythm of the place. There was no breeze now, no movement, only the steady pulse of stillness, as if the entire multiverse had settled into one long, peaceful breath. Morty looked up at the glowing tree. "Do you think this is where everyone ends up?" Rick thought for a moment. Maybe not everyone, but maybe everything worth remembering does. Morty nodded. "Feels fair." The air shimmered slightly in front of them, and a figure began to take shape, light bending into the faint outline of June. She wasn't solid. She was a reflection of warmth, her edges blending softly into the world around her. Her eyes were like twin stars, faint but alive. "Hey," Morty whispered, his voice catching just a little. June smiled gently. "You made it." Her voice carried like wind through silk, touching everything but never pushing. "You both did," Rick nodded slowly. "Didn't think we'd end up here," he muttered. "Guess the universe finally ran out of ways to argue with itself." June's smile deepened. "It didn't run out, Rick. It just realized it didn't need to." Morty stood. "So, this garden, it's everything." "It's memory," she said softly, "but not the kind you keep. The kind that keeps you." Morty frowned a little, trying to understand, but her tone made it unnecessary. He could feel the truth in her words. This was what all the collapsing had been for. Not destruction, but gathering. All the fragments of reality coming home to rest. June's glow flickered slightly as she turned to Rick. "You spent so long running from your echoes," she said. "But every version of you loved something somewhere. That love was enough to hold the multiverse together." Rick looked down at his hands. They shimmered faintly, light moving through them. "I don't know if I'd call what I did love." June stepped closer, voice softer. "Maybe not the kind you recognized. But love doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like regret. Sometimes it looks like staying, even when you want to run." He didn't respond. He just nodded, almost imperceptibly. June's gaze shifted to Morty. "You learned to listen," she said. "That's how universes heal." Morty's throat tightened. "Are we done?" She tilted her head, smiling. "You're not done. You're whole." "That's different." The garden began to shimmer around them, as if reacting to her words. The trees hummed softly, their light pulsing in slow, synchronized rhythm. Every color seemed to sigh, folding into gentle unity. June stepped backward, her form thinning into air. "Stay here as long as you need," she whispered. "Every memory that ever loved you is waiting." Then she was gone. The air where she stood shimmered once more and stilled. Morty exhaled, feeling something loosen inside him. "She's right," he murmured. "This doesn't feel like ending. It feels like remembering forever." Rick nodded slowly, eyes half closed. "Guess forever's not such a bad place to rest." They sat together beneath the glowing tree, surrounded by the quiet hum of infinite selves at peace. The light flickered softly, like fireflies made of memory, rising and fading into the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. Neither spoke again for a long time. They didn't need to. Every silence now carried meaning, shared, eternal, unbroken, and as the garden glowed around them, it was clear that the multiverse hadn't died. It had only finally remembered how to dream. The air was warm with stillness. The garden no longer shimmered like it once had. It breathed slowly, like a living thing that had finally found peace. Each leaf of light swayed gently in an unseen current, and the sound that filled the silence wasn't quite sound, more like the echo of contentment itself. Rick sat on the bench beneath the luminous tree, his back hunched but his eyes unburdened. Morty sat beside him, quiet, staring at the horizon, or whatever passed for one in this place. It wasn't a line dividing sky and land anymore, but a smooth blending of soft blues and pale golds, like memory dissolving into light. No words had been spoken for what felt like hours, but time didn't behave the same here. There was no tick, no measure, only rhythm, breathing, remembering, existing. Rick's hands rested on his knees. They flickered faintly, like static in the shape of fingers. "You know," he said at last, his voice calm, stripped of sarcasm, "I spent most of my life trying to prove I was smarter than everything. That if I could understand the pattern, I could control it." Morty looked at him but didn't interrupt. Rick chuckled softly, not the bitter kind, but the kind that carried a strange peace. "Turns out the pattern didn't need control. It just needed to finish breathing." Morty tilted his head. "You mean the universe is collapsing?" Rick nodded faintly. "Yeah, all those layers, all those alternate realities. I thought I could fix them, or at least hold them apart. Turns out they just wanted to rest together, to stop arguing with themselves." He took a long breath, letting it out slowly. The sound was like air moving through glass. "Guess I know the feeling." Morty smiled a little. "You mean you're tired too?" Rick gave him a sidelong glance, sharp then soft. "Kid, I've been tired since before the concept of before existed." He smirked weakly. "But this is different. It's not the tired that makes you want to run. It's the kind that makes you want to stay." They fell silent again, watching the light move like slow waves through the trees. Somewhere far off, faint laughter drifted. Not loud or eerie, just familiar. Morty could tell it was them, or versions of them, laughing from other moments that had finally found their place. He leaned back, hands folded behind his head. "Hey, Rick? Yeah?" Morty hesitated, searching for the right words. "Do you think we're real, like right now?" Rick tilted his head back, eyes half closed. "Does it matter?" Morty frowned. "I mean, maybe. If this is all memory, then maybe we're just leftovers." Rick chuckled softly. "Morty, everything's leftovers. Stars, atoms, thoughts, regrets. It's all recycled energy pretending it's new." He turned slightly, his gaze landing on Morty. "But that doesn't make it less real. If it exists enough to be felt, it's real enough to matter." Morty absorbed that in silence. The thought settled somewhere deep, warm, and heavy. "So what now?" Rick shrugged, eyes wandering across the glowing horizon. "Now we wait. We breathe. Maybe we dream a little longer. Maybe we don't." He grinned faintly. "For once, there's no next mission. No portal. No crisis. Just this." Morty's lips curved into a small, tired smile. "Kinda nice, isn't it?" Rick gave a slow nod. "Yeah, feels earned." For a while, they just listened. The garden made a faint humming sound, like a lullaby being sung by the stars. Every so often, small flickers of light drifted past, echoes of moments, pieces of laughter, quiet gestures of kindness that had once existed across countless worlds. One landed on Morty's shoulder, a small glowing thread. He touched it, and for a heartbeat saw himself hugging his mom. Then it vanished, folding gently into the air. Rick watched him. "You see something?" Morty nodded. "Yeah, just home stuff." Rick looked down, his face unreadable, though his eyes softened. "Good." There was a pause. Not awkward, not empty, but dense with the kind of silence that holds everything. Then Morty spoke again. "Rick, do you regret it?" Rick blinked slowly. "Regret what?" "Everything. The running, the fighting, the losing. The way you kept everyone out." Rick didn't answer right away. He stared ahead, hands clasped loosely together, elbows on his knees. His reflection flickered in the soft ground, shifting through versions of himself, older, younger, colder, kinder. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that the words almost disappeared into the hum. "I used to think regret was a waste of energy, but maybe that's 'cause I was afraid of it." He sighed, long and trembling. "Every version of me thought he could outrun what he did. Turns out, the only way to stop running is to stop existing separately. So yeah, Morty, I regret not realizing sooner that all those versions, even the ones I hated, were just trying to be one person again." Morty's eyes shimmered. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, "I forgive you, Rick." Rick blinked as if the words took a second to reach him. He turned, really looking at Morty now. His mouth twitched slightly, not into a smile exactly, but into something that almost resembled peace. "Yeah," he said softly. "Guess that means I can finally forgive me too." The light around them deepened, shifting into a hue like twilight, not fading, just gentling. The garden seemed to draw closer, wrapping them in its quiet pulse. Morty leaned his head back, staring upward. "You hear that?" Rick tilted his head. "What?" "The silence." Rick smiled faintly. "Yeah, kinda beautiful, huh? It's like..." Everything that used to hurt finally stopped talking. Rick chuckled under his breath. "That's one way to put it." A small pause. Then Morty added, "I think this is what peace sounds like." Rick nodded slowly. "Don't get used to it. Even forever gets bored eventually." But his tone wasn't cynical anymore. It was affectionate, amused, almost tender. Morty laughed softly. "You think we'll wake up?" Rick looked thoughtful. "Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the point isn't to wake up. Maybe the point's to rest." They sat together, the last two shapes of identity in an infinite garden of shared memory. The air shimmered with warmth. Every so often their outlines would blur, not fading but merging slightly, like ink spreading into water. Rick glanced at Morty one last time, his eyes full of something human, something rare. "You did good, kid." Morty smiled, voice barely a whisper. "You too, Rick." The hum of the garden rose softly around them, as if the multiverse itself was exhaling. Light washed over their faces, silver, then gold, then something colorless and infinite. Rick leaned back, closing his eyes. "Guess this is it, huh?" Morty nodded, voice small but steady. "Yeah." Rick's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not a bad way to go out." Morty looked at him, eyes warm. "Not going out, Rick, just becoming part of it." Rick's answer was a sigh that sounded like peace. The light swelled, not bright but full. The outlines of both of them softened, blending into the luminous air. Their final breath synchronized with the heartbeat of everything. For a long moment, there was no distinction between Rick, Morty, or the garden. Only stillness. Only the memory of laughter fading into light, and then nothing but calm. The garden had no edges now. What was once the last quiet place in existence had dissolved into light, and the light itself was not blinding. It was the color of breath, the hue of something that could only be felt, not seen. If someone were to listen closely, they might hear the soft rhythm of it. Not a heartbeat, not wind, but the steady lull of all things remembering how to rest. Rick's bench was gone, though its memory lingered. Morty's laughter was still in the air, folded into the hum that threaded through everything. They were no longer sitting side by side, because there was no longer a side to sit on. They were within each other now, within the fabric of what once was. Each memory, each regret, each smile had become a note in a quiet symphony that would never end, yet never begin again either. It was not death. It was not rebirth. It was rest. In that infinite stillness the stars began to hum, softly as if hesitant to disturb the peace. They weren't scattered across space anymore. They hung together like glowing dust in a breath of warm air. The multiverse, once endless and unruly, now pulsed as a single organism. Every world, every possible version of every thought, folded inward like petals closing at dusk. And in that closing, there was no fear. Each world whispered its own goodbye. And yet each whisper was met by another, not as a farewell, but as a soft reply, "We're still here." Somewhere within the glow, a faint voice spoke. Or maybe it was simply memory echoing through light. It was June, her tone as familiar as a lullaby half remembered from childhood. "Nothing ends," she murmured. "It only becomes gentle enough to be held." Her words rippled outward, passing through the shapes that had once been Rick and Morty. They could still hear her, though hearing didn't mean sound anymore. It meant understanding without the need for translation. Morty's presence stirred like a dream stretching. Rick, he thought, or perhaps he simply was the thought. "Can you still hear me?" Rick's response wasn't spoken, but it shimmered through the shared warmth between them. "Yeah, kid, guess I can. Are we gone?" Rick's essence flickered, amused in a way that didn't need a smirk to be felt. "Nah, we're just..." Finished talking for a while. That made Morty smile, or whatever smiling meant now. "Feels quiet, it's supposed to." The silence stretched out, long and endless, but not empty. It was filled with the echoes of everything that had ever been loved. Planets, particles, forgotten jokes, small kindnesses left in the corners of existence, all of it hummed together like one last breath that refused to fade. And then, from that soft vibration, something began to form. Not a world, but a memory of warmth, a kind of lullaby made out of light. It rose gently, as if the multiverse itself wanted to sing itself to sleep. At first, it was only the rhythm, slow, patient, the cadence of breathing. Then came faint melodies, built from laughter and forgiveness, woven with all the tiny, tender moments that had once been scattered across infinite universes. Rick and Morty could feel themselves in it. Fragments of conversation, small silences between arguments, quiet car rides, shared breakfasts after long nights. Every version of them was folded in. Every regret found its counterpart, every wound found its echo, and through it all June's voice lingered, whispering softly through the vibration. "You were never separate. You were never lost. You were always one heartbeat away from being whole." The melody drifted through the remains of time. Morty's thoughts flickered again, quieter now. "Rick, what happens when the song ends?" Rick's answer came like a sigh woven through starlight. "Then it starts again in someone else's dream." Morty felt something like peace. "You think they'll remember us?" Rick's presence warmed. "Doesn't matter. We'll be the quiet between their words. That's enough." For a long moment the light simply swayed. The stars folded deeper inward, their glow now dimming to the color of candlelight through closed eyelids. Somewhere far off a small sound could be heard, like someone exhaling after crying for too long. And then the song changed again, slower, softer, quieter. The lullaby of the multiverse found its final rhythm. Each note lingered longer than the last. Each pause stretched wider, filled not with absence but with serenity. Rick's laughter turned into a hum that rippled through everything. Morty's questions dissolved into the gentle pulse of curiosity that would one day spark new worlds. June's voice became the whispering wind that brushed across them all, murmuring the same word again and again: rest. The light deepened. Folding once more, time took its final breath, and then the story, their story, began to fade like a candle at dawn. But in that fading, it didn't vanish. It simply became softer, as if every molecule of being had learned to sleep. Somewhere, in a quiet corner of a child's dream, a boy who looked a little like Morty would one day stare at the stars and feel something, a peace he couldn't name. Somewhere else, an old man with eyes like Rick's would laugh at nothing, and the echo of that laugh would feel like home. The multiverse wasn't gone. It had just learned how to rest in harmony. Every universe, every version, every echo was now part of the same breath, inhaling and exhaling together, endlessly. The hum became fainter, the light dimmer, but the warmth remained, and then there was nothing but quiet. Not silence, but quiet. The kind that holds love inside it. Rick's voice came one last time, almost imperceptible, threaded through the stillness. "Hey," Kid Morty stirred faintly. "Yeah? Everything's gonna be okay." And the light, that vast eternal ocean of memory, pulsed once, softly, like the final note of a song that never really ended. The hum subsided. The stars folded completely, and what remained was warmth, and the peace that comes when every version of yourself finally learns how to breathe together. The multiverse had sung itself to sleep, and in its quiet heart, the last echo whispered, "Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.